This video is crafted to assist you in unwinding or drifting off to sleep. Before we begin, if you suspect you might fall asleep, please introduce yourself in the comments. Also, don't forget to like the video and subscribe if you haven't done so already. As always, I'm eager to know where you're tuning in from, so feel free to share your location and the current time in the comments. Thank you once again for joining me. Get comfortable, pour yourself a glass of water, ensure your door is locked, and turn off the lights. Remember to say hello in the comments. It's time to close your eyes. This incident occurred earlier last year, and it still unsettles me if I dwell on it too long. First, let me give you some context. I'm a delivery driver for Uber Eats, and I've been doing it as a side gig for the past year to make some extra cash. Also, just to mention, I'm female. Anyway, working for Uber Eats is a pretty laid-back job, although the pay isn't the best, especially during nighttime. Usually, any notifications that come in after 10 p.m. are just small fast food orders from customers, where the likelihood of receiving tips is even lower than usual. Late-night deliveries are rarely lucrative, which is why I seldom take them. However, on this particular night last year, there was a special bonus offer. Complete 15 deliveries within a specific time frame and earn an additional $75. That was music to my ears. Under such conditions, late-night deliveries are fantastic because there's no traffic, and it doesn't matter where you're picking up from. Up in the air frantically. The quicker you finish those tasks, the sooner you can head home and crash, I thought to myself. I was in the zone and wrapped up my final McDonald's delivery at 2:30 a.m., collected my bonus, and called it a night. For some context, this all unfolded in downtown San Diego. The heart of downtown San Diego is filled with lively restaurants and clubs, but as you move further out, the atmosphere becomes more questionable. Beyond 16th Street, it gets particularly dubious with numerous homeless encampments and the like. I usually try to steer clear of that part of town, but to reach the freeway and head home, I had to drive through the neighborhood. A detail worth mentioning is that I drive a 2002 Ford Focus, an old model with no automatic features. To raise or lower the windows, I have to stretch over and crank the lever manually. Since it's a hassle to do this every time, I typically keep both windows down while making deliveries, as it's more convenient for picking up and dropping off orders. That night, my windows were down as usual. I intended to roll them up before reaching 16th Street, where the homeless encampments were, but I didn't manage to do so in time. As I turned onto a side street leading towards the main thoroughfare, I noticed a man in an orange reflective construction vest standing by the roadside. Construction is a constant in downtown, often occurring at night, so I didn't give it much thought. However, as I drew nearer, the man dashed into the middle of the street, frantically waving his arms. Signaling for me to halt, I began to decelerate, assuming he intended to manage traffic or redirect me in some way. I reduced my speed to 10 kilometers per hour, then to 5, maintaining a safe distance while trying to discern his intentions. Suddenly, he burst into a jog toward my vehicle, positioning himself directly in front of it, effectively preventing me from advancing. Instantly, a sense of unease washed over me. This situation felt strange, and I regretted not having my windows rolled up. It was 3 a.m. on a deserted road, and aside from this man and me, there wasn't a single person in sight. People often speak of the fight-or-flight response, and I had always wondered how I would react if faced with such a scenario. Now I knew my instinct was to freeze. As I slowed down, a realization hit me, 5 seconds later than it should have. This individual wasn't a construction worker. Despite wearing a hard hat and vest, he wore the most unsettling smile I had ever encountered. Initially, I assumed he smiled out of friendliness, but holding a grin for more than a few seconds is deeply disconcerting. Try it yourself. Count to 5 in your head while smiling, and you'll understand what I mean. That was exactly what this man was doing. Now that he stood before me, I could see he appeared to be homeless, or at least I wasn't sure. He was an older gentleman, likely in his 60s, though homelessness often ages a person beyond their years, so I couldn't be certain. He simply stared at me, eyes wide and grinning, all teeth on display. His smile and demeanor reminded me uncannily of Twisty from American Horror Story. This guy seemed unhinged. Clearly, I should have reversed immediately. However, My mind was spiraling into panic, and I couldn't think quickly enough to react. I was paralyzed with fear in my car, convinced that this was the moment I would meet my end. He remained silent the entire time, just leering at me. Then, like a stealthy ninja, he leapt onto the hood of my vehicle and struck it with his fist. I was immobilized by terror, simply watching him. He began pounding on the hood, crawling around on his hands and knees without uttering a single word, just crawling and staring at me. That was the most horrifying aspect. He never once broke eye contact, and he maintained a chilling grin throughout the ordeal. The idea that my windows were open made me feel nauseous, but the thought of looking away or making any sudden movements to roll them up was even more frightening. It was as if any abrupt action might provoke him to force his way into my car. He remained mute. I almost wished he would speak, as it might have been less menacing than his silent pounding and relentless gaze. In truth, the entire encounter likely lasted no more than 15 seconds, but it seemed to stretch on for an eternity. I was in a state of panic, and before I could muster the sense to take any rational action, I noticed headlights approaching in my rearview mirror, coming up behind me from down the street. The man saw them too, and in an instant, he leapt off the hood and sprinted away, heading toward the oncoming vehicle. In a surge of adrenaline, I slammed my foot on the gas and didn't dare look back until I was halfway home on the freeway. The experience left me shaken. For a long time afterward, I avoided making deliveries at night and vowed never again to venture into that part of downtown. Before heading home, I often choose the longer route, and I never drive with the windows down at night, especially if the area looks even slightly run down. What I've come to understand from this experience is how easily I can be naive, automatically placing trust in someone simply because they're wearing a uniform. At first, I didn't even question slowing down, despite the situation appearing undeniably suspicious. I felt reassured by the presence of someone seemingly trustworthy on the road. My subconscious thoughts were along the lines of, "Oh, great! A public servant is here to help me avoid taking a wrong turn." By the time I came to a stop, it would have been too late if this person had intended to harm me. The thought sends shivers down my spine. Eventually, I managed to calm myself by convincing myself that this man was probably under the influence of something and meant no harm, which I sincerely hope was the case. For my own peace of mind, I choose to believe that. However, what truly disturbed me was that this individual was dressed as a road worker and initially acted in a manner that led me to believe he was legitimate. Why else would he wear such an outfit, and why was he attempting to flag down cars? I don't have the answers, and I'm relieved that I didn't uncover what his intentions were. To provide some context, I reside in Michigan, though I won't specify the city. It's an incredibly safe place with virtually no crime aside from domestic disputes and the occasional theft. Almost like Mr. Rogers' neighborhood, I suppose. It's likely for this reason that my friend and I became targets that night. On the street near my house, there is a semi-arch dog park. It features a playground, some trails, and a spacious parking lot. During the day, it is frequented by numerous people, as it is an open space surrounded by residential buildings. All the streets adjacent to it are lined with various associations, including mine, which is barely a mile away. At night, the park attracts a different crowd. Since it is safe and accessible, many people gather there to enjoy themselves in their cars without being interrupted while they smoke. My friends and I stopped by for the latter. We parked our vehicle in the middle of a row, a few spaces away from the other cars, rolled the windows down slightly, and began to chat and smoke, just as we have done many times before. The parking lot is shaped like a large oval, and once you're inside, you must go all the way around to exit. My friend Morgan parked facing the entrance on the opposite side, with a divider in the center, just in case we needed to make a quick exit if we sensed trouble. You never know, but enough about the setting, I digress. Morgan and I had been relaxing for about 10 minutes, and a few cars had passed through. Each time, we watched attentively, wanting to remain aware of who was around us, and perhaps fueled by a slight sense of paranoia. We kept a vigilant eye until we felt there was no threat. Eventually, a massive, bright yellow truck pulled in. When I say massive, I mean you'd need to climb into this thing, and it was impossible to miss. The windows were tinted, making it impossible to see inside the cab. The driver maneuvered around the parking lot and headed straight for the exit. He exited neither too sluggishly nor in a hurry, as if he was merely turning around. Morgan and I exchanged a few playful remarks about his choice of color before moving on, dismissing it as inconsequential. We lingered for another 15 minutes, engaging in a profound and meaningful conversation while smoking a bit more. The hour was nearing midnight, a clear sign that it was time to head home. As Morgan began to pull out of the park, we both looked down Main Street in either direction. Instantly, something caught my attention. The same yellow truck was passing by, heading in the same direction as us. A little background on me. I suffer from severe anxiety, always have and likely always will. This means I tend to worry about things that might seem ordinary to others. Past experiences have made me particularly wary and prone to paranoia. If I encounter someone twice at the grocery store, it can make me uneasy. So, my reaction to the truck was predictable. Despite its conspicuous presence, I tried to convince myself that my anxiety was unwarranted, that noticing it didn't imply any threat. I kept my thoughts to myself as we continued on our way home. My neighborhood is rather peculiar, so let me clarify to make things a bit clearer. There's a long, winding road that runs straight to the end of the residential area. Branching off from this main road are smaller streets lined with houses, and mine is the second to last. As we arrived at my house and began our farewells, we were abruptly interrupted. Our conversation came to a halt as the same yellow truck drove past the exit of my circle and into the last circle of the main road. Morgan turned to me and said, "Isn't that the same truck from before?" Responded, "Yeah, they drove by us while leaving the park, too. We kept an eye on the entrance because there's no other way out, just one way in, one way out. So when he drove past us on the main road again, I started to freak out. Why was this guy here? That truck's never been around. It's too obvious to overlook. It couldn't possibly be a coincidence." I began pleading with Morgan to come inside, urging her to wait a few more minutes to ensure he left and didn't follow her home. She tried to dismiss my concerns, assuring me it was fine and there was no way he was tailing us. As we argued in the car, the truck turned into the first entrance of my neighborhood. He immediately parked and switched off the engine. My anxiety was screaming at me to run. There was no way this person wasn't following us. Morgan shouted, "Screw this! Get inside!" We bolted out of the car, and I frantically dug through my purse, fumbling for my keys while praying to any deity or spirit willing to listen that my key would work and get us inside. I don't live alone. My younger sister stays with me, and my grandparents were visiting. They would be right inside. All I could focus on was my tough-as-nails West Virginia redneck grandfather, who was downstairs with his rifle by his chair. He would know what to do. With Morgan right on my heels, I flung the door open with the first twist of my key. Thank God. We rushed in, slamming the door behind us. Trembling uncontrollably, I scrambled down to where my grandfather was, shouting his name in a panic. He jumped up and st. After calming down, Morgan and I realized how foolish we must have sounded when we explained the situation. He suggested that we might have been paranoid due to the smoking. Once we were a bit more composed, my grandfather assured us he would investigate the matter, but first, he needed Morgan to move her car away from the front door. We agreed to go outside together, sticking to our buddy system for life, and tried to laugh off the incident, joking about how ridiculous we must have looked running through the door. However, the moment Morgan descended the steps of my house, the comfort evaporated. She gasped, spun around so quickly that I barely had time to react before she screamed that he was there. Apparently, when she glanced around the corner, the truck was driving directly towards us, just a few feet away. We scrambled inside, and as I shut the door, I saw the truck speed past. We dashed back into the house and into the kitchen, which has windows that face the circle. There, my family was staring out, watching the truck repeatedly circle back to my house. It felt like we were being hunted in our own home, and I was on the verge of being sick. I struggled to hold back tears. Yet again, the truck drove away, and my grandfather decided it was time to act. With a gun in hand, he prepared to leave and asked if I wanted to accompany him. I felt a strong urge to uncover what this person's problem was. We jumped into his car and drove onto the main road. Almost immediately after we pulled out, we saw the truck emerge from another circle. I started to panic, shouting at my grandfather. Grandpa advised me to remain calm and focus, explaining that the person in the truck hadn't noticed our car and was unaware it was us. We observed as the truck circled past my house and then headed toward the exit, the very same exit our car was nearing. My anxiety grew, my stomach churning, as we began driving toward him. Just as the truck attempted to pass us, my grandfather maneuvered his car directly in front of it, flashing his high beams into the cab. The driver was an older man, wearing wire-rimmed glasses and a white t-shirt with a balding head. He couldn't have looked more ordinary. I saw him shout something before reversing and making a complete U-turn, heading toward the other exit of the circle, back to the main road. My grandfather's intent was clear. He wanted this guy out of there immediately. He floored the accelerator, tailing the man at 80 miles per hour through the winding road in a 25 miles per hour zone, an experience that was nothing short of terrifying. We pursued him out of my complex and down the street, but unfortunately, other cars obstructed our path, and he managed to speed away onto the highway. I held it together until we finally turned back home after unsuccessfully searching for the truck. That's when I broke down, tears streaming, as the man I saw bore a striking resemblance to my estranged, abusive father, who was supposed to be miles away in another state. I asked my grandfather if he saw what I saw, and he responded by gently rubbing my back, assuring me that everything would be okay. Upon returning home, we shared the incident with the rest of the family. They had seen us pull away and chase after the car, but there wasn't much visibility from my porch, so we contacted the police and filed a report. When we first provided our address, the operator replied with a hint of disbelief. "Are you sure? You folks don't usually have crime in that area." It made me chuckle a bit. However, nothing came of the report. Nobody had seen the truck in the vicinity doing anything suspicious, and we never managed to note down a license plate. We were left without any explanation as to who this person was or what their intentions might have been. As a sort of side note, my sister and I experienced a peculiar moment before everything unfolded. She confessed to me, once things had settled, that just before I burst through the door, she had a nagging feeling that something was wrong. She was silently questioning whether I was all right. Perhaps it was just intuition, but I like to believe it was something more. Regardless, to the creepy bald man with a penchant for following young women, you better hope we don't cross paths again. My grandfather is waiting. This unsettling incident took place in July of 1996. I had recently completed my service in the Army and was stationed at Fort Hood, Texas. At midnight, I made the decision to outprocess and begin my journey back to Wisconsin. I was so eager to leave that I struggled to sleep throughout the day. Finally, at 11:45 p.m., I got out of bed and went to sign out with the desk sergeant. Knowing that many people wanted to sign out at midnight, he decided to make his rounds. You couldn't leave until you received the final sign-off from the sergeant and returned your key, so I waited. Finally, at 2:45 a.m., he came back. I handed in my key, got the sign-off, and by 3:30 a.m., I was on my way. Initially, I was so pumped with adrenaline that I felt I could drive for days. Unfortunately, that adrenaline's effects didn't last long, and as I drove through Dallas, I found myself struggling to stay awake. Just beyond Denton, I resolved to pull over at the next available spot and catch a quick nap until dawn. My eyelids heavy with fatigue, I parked as soon as I spotted a suitable place. Stepping out of my car, I inhaled deeply to clear my head, discarded some trash, and took a moment to inspect my surroundings. There were only 3 other cars and a couple of semi-trucks parked there. It was a picnic area, not a rest stop, so facilities were absent. After disposing of my garbage, I briefly glanced at a poster featuring several missing persons, but I didn't linger on it. I returned to my vehicle, a basic Geo Metro, devoid of a radio, power windows, or power locks. I rolled the windows down slightly, turned on the boom box for some music, and settled down to sleep. I had been dozing for merely 5 or 10 minutes when I felt the car shake slightly. Cracking one eye open, I peered outside but saw nothing amiss. so I dismissed it and attempted to fall asleep once more. Before long, I heard a noise resembling someone trying the door handle and scratching at the keyhole. I sat up quickly, scanning my surroundings, but saw no one nearby. Checking all the windows and seeing nothing, I chalked it up to exhaustion and lay back down, switching off the radio. Despite the stifling Texas night in July, I was too weary to care and reclined again. Moments later, the door handle rattled once more, and the car shook more forcefully. I sat up abruptly and saw a man standing by the passenger side, peering in. Despite the oppressive heat and humidity, he wore a red sweatshirt with the hood pulled up. I couldn't make out his face, but he seemed young and fresh out of the military. I shouted at him, demanding to know what he wanted. He simply stared at me. I stepped out of the car, and although I'm only 5 feet 6 inches and was quite furious, he just walked away toward the picnic tables as if nothing had occurred. I continued yelling that I would deal with him if he returned. Deciding it was best to leave, I got back into my car and resumed my journey. However, just about 10 miles down the road, exhaustion hit me again. Fortunately, another 10 miles further at mile marker 35, there was another picnic stop. North Texas doesn't have many rest areas, but they do offer these picnic spots. I pulled into the second picnic stop, reversed into a parking spot just in case I needed a quick exit, though I wasn't sure why I felt that way. There was only one other car and no semi-trucks in sight. I locked the doors, cracked the windows, and turned on my boombox. I fell asleep almost immediately, but about 30 minutes later, I was startled by a loud thud on my driver's side window. I jolted awake and looked around, but saw no one. With my military mindset, I foolishly got out of the car, only to find no one around. I assumed it was just my nerves from the previous encounter. I climbed back into my car, locked the doors once more, and closed my eyes. Despite feeling alert, I lay there with my eyes shut, sensing someone's gaze on me. Suddenly, I opened my eyes and saw the same man in a red sweater, standing with his head held high, smiling at me. I quickly attempted to open the door to confront him, but the locks on my Geo wouldn't budge. He backed away, still staring. By the time I emerged, he stood approximately 30 feet away in the shadows. Though he appeared slender, he was around 6 feet 2 inches or 6 feet 3 inches. Even though I felt confident I could handle him due to my military background, I noticed something glinting in his hand, possibly a machete. Reacting quickly, I seized a baseball bat from my back seat and began yelling at him to come and face me. I don't exactly know why I provoked him, but he started advancing toward me. Just as I took a few steps, a yellow van swiftly pulled up and parked beside my car. Realizing the situation, I saw 2 other men inside the van, both wearing hooded sweatshirts. Before they could exit, I bolted to my car, grateful it was a manual that didn't stall as I sped away. The first guy was nearly at my car when I sharply turned right and accelerated onto the interstate. I didn't stop until I was about 20 miles into Oklahoma. There, I paused for fuel and used the restroom. Inside, I noticed a flyer I had barely glanced at during my first picnic stop. It featured several missing persons and cautioned people against lingering too long at rest areas. It described a potential suspect as roughly 6 feet tall, wearing blue jeans, green shoes, and a red hooded sweatshirt. A chill ran through me as I turned pale. Since it was daylight, I drove the rest of the way to Wisconsin, fully alert. For some reason, I never reported the incident to the number on the flyer, nor did I share it with anyone. Now residing in North Texas, I pass those 2 picnic stops daily on my commute and often reflect on that night, wondering if they ever caught anyone else. Whether they were ever caught, I tried searching for information but couldn't uncover any stories about it on the internet. A little while ago, just as the sun was setting, I decided to take a drive with my friend Rose up into the mountains. I grew up near the city limits and often navigated those mountain roads. Rose, a relatively new friend in my life, had only ventured into the mountains a handful of times before. I was keen to show her how impressive it was at night, especially when you're heading back to town and can see all the city lights as you leave the foothills. I have a passion for listening to eerie videos and watching horror films, which might have been quite beneficial on this particular night. We set off in my van, a reliable '03 Toyota that had successfully made the journey dozens of times before. There's a section where the pavement ends and the gravel road leads you further into the mountain. Just next to the transition from asphalt to gravel, there's a dirt stretch where people used to park their trucks and trailers. As Rose and I drove by, I observed that the pullout was empty, as is typical for this hour. It was around 10 p.m., the sun had set, and the town's lights with timers had all flickered on. I had never seen any lights up on the mountain. Almost every farming field there is fenced off with a locked gate that usually bears a private property sign. More often than not, these signs have bullet holes in the middle, a clear indication that the owners are armed and generally irritated with fools who attempt to trespass into their fields. Every field in the mountains is irrigated with the central pivot irrigation systems. Those extensive and often repeated structures with metal frameworks and wheels are a common sight throughout the agricultural regions of the United States. I had seen a few irrigation systems in town equipped with lights on timers, so initially, I wasn't overly startled by the sight of a light in a field. We had only traveled a quarter mile by then, but it dawned on me that not only was this light unfamiliar, it was also in an incorrect location. "Oh no," I muttered. Likely not the reaction Rose wanted during her first nighttime mountain excursion. "What's up?" Rose inquired. I hesitated before responding. Well, I know it's harvest season for farmers, so a light in the field could be reasonable. Yet, I've never noticed that particular light before. I pointed towards an area where a solitary, random amber light glowed at the field's edge. The darkness obscured any fences or boulders around it, but I was familiar enough with the area to recognize it as the boundary of a property. I began tapping nervously on the wheel, overwhelmed by conflicting feelings. I was eager to continue, as the mountains promised to be stunning under the half moon, and Rose had never experienced them at night. Meanwhile, my mind reminded me that after consuming dozens of hours of horror stories each month, I should at least derive some insight from them. "I apologize, Rose," I said. "I'd proceed if those were tractor headlights, but I've never seen just one light in that particular field. I had never seen it cultivated before, so it seemed illogical to expend energy or money on illuminating it." Rose, ever impressive, didn't mind our decision to turn back after barely a quarter mile. We pivoted and began our return journey toward the asphalt. Though I couldn't explain why, I suddenly felt as if a timer had begun its countdown. "Hey, Rose, could you grab the handle? I'm about to speed up, and you might want to hold on tight." "I promise we're safe," I assured her. Silently, Rose gripped the overhead handle on the passenger side as I accelerated. A sense of urgency compelled me to hurry, so I did just that, racing back toward the asphalt as swiftly as I dared. My unease only grew when we reached the truck parking area. A white truck with a flatbed trailer, absent just 10 minutes earlier, was now there, surrounded by about 6 men. The truck's headlights were on, and one guy was recklessly reversing an ATV off the flatbed trailer, so quickly that I feared he might collide with one of his companions. I sped past, and someone dashed behind the car. I turned onto a road that would lead us to a main thoroughfare. "Rose, as I accelerate to 70 miles per hour, were those people there when we drove by earlier? I just want to confirm I'm not imagining things." "No," Rose replied. I exhaled, mimicking her tone, even as I pushed the speed to 75 and glanced in my rearview mirror. As far as I could see, they weren't pursuing us, but we still had 8 miles of straight, flat road with no cover before we would finally reach civilization. "Did they seem like they were in a rush to you?" "There was no other traffic, so we didn't need to slow down for anyone, which helped us both stay as composed as possible." "Just a bit," she chuckled nervously, glancing over her shoulder to check for any approaching vehicles. Fortunately, there were none. We drove to a crowded restaurant and remained in the car to calm our nerves. We tried to figure out why this man had appeared so suddenly in the middle of the night. Rose suggested that maybe their friends were camping and ran into trouble. All the land in the mountains is privately owned, so camping there is not allowed. I'm relieved that Rose and I left when we did, so we didn't have to discover why 6 men felt the need to hurry up the mountain in the dead of night. Since high school, I've come to understand that some of the most gratifying purchases stem from the most frustrating transactions. When I was about 17, I decided to get my driver's license because I was tired of spending so much time at home with my parents. They weren't bad people, but my mom had a tendency to loudly argue with my dad over a political news channel, which grew tiresome quickly. After obtaining my license, I initially used a texting service called Cordy, but it went out of business, leaving me without a phone. As having a cell phone was considered essential by my parents, the responsibility fell on me to buy my own. They agreed to cover the cost, and I would work around the house to repay them. I had to manage all the details of acquiring it. I didn't live in a bad neighborhood. The Radio Shack I needed to visit was situated in a more questionable part of town, notorious for its escorts and dealers. While I had never heard of any incidents of violence occurring there, the atmosphere was decidedly unsettling. On the route to Radio Shack, there was one apartment building in particular that had a dangerous reputation, known as a hotspot for addicts. Once at Radio Shack, the purchasing process turned out to be unnecessarily convoluted. The young woman who initially assisted me not only activated the wrong phone but managed to break it as well. After a lengthy ordeal, everything was finally sorted out. They instructed me to set up security features on my new phone and to add a backup passcode. I chose one of those swipe pattern codes, but promptly forgot it as soon as I got back into my dad's truck. It was around 8 p.m. when I approached an intersection near the notorious apartment complex while heading west. The road was nearly deserted, with only 2 other vehicles traveling in the same direction. I stopped at a red light behind an orange PT Cruiser. As I waited, a truck turned right, and a man stood on the northwest corner, waiting to cross east past us. When the light turned green, the PT Cruiser remained stationary. I paused for a moment before honking my horn, which caused the car ahead to back up slightly, panicking me. In my confusion, I failed to shift the car into reverse and instead accidentally put it in park, frantically pressing the gas to no effect. I struggled to find the correct gear, and by the time I managed to do so, the PT Cruiser had already driven off. The man who had been waiting to cross then approached my vehicle. He was about 5 feet 6 inches and slim, with his truck pointing out where the man had slammed his head. The deputy took notes, his expression shifting from skepticism to concern as I recounted every detail. His long limbs and sunken features had given him an eerie, zombie-like appearance, and his anger was palpable. He wore a grimy, neutral-toned hoodie, and as he approached, it became clear just how bloodied he truly was. The extent of his injuries was hard to gauge, with all the dirt and blood obscuring his face. As he attempted to open the driver's side door, I finally managed to shift the truck into neutral. The vehicle emitted an odd sound that startled him, yet I still couldn't move. He then slammed his face against the window, appearing as if blood was streaming from his eyes, though he showed no signs of pain while he yanked at the handle. At last, I found the correct gear, my heart pounding with fear. I hesitated to hurt him by speeding away too hastily, but when he brandished a gun, I screamed, floored the gas pedal, and inadvertently dragged him briefly as his arm clung to the side mirror. He cried out and released his grip, allowing me to accelerate to 60 miles per hour towards home. Upon bursting into the house in a state of sheer panic, my mother scolded me for my dramatic entrance. Overwhelmed by the experience, I started to vomit and dashed to the bathroom. After finally explaining the situation, my parents remained doubtful, suspecting I might be embellishing the story, which led them to contact the police. The dispatcher informed us that I wasn't the only one reporting a man with bloodied eyes. Not long after, a deputy arrived at our door. Despite my mother's lingering skepticism, she sent me to speak with him. I provided a detailed description and pointed out the bloody face print on the truck window where the man had slammed his head. The police collected a sample from the truck and later confirmed that they had a suspect in custody who matched my description. The individual had road rash and a dislocated shoulder, but he was not in any life-threatening condition. His connection to a series of attempted carjackings while under the influence of cocaine soon made headlines on the local news. Eventually, he was convicted on a drug-related charge, and since then, I've heard nothing further about the case. Approximately 29 years ago, After graduating from high school, I relocated to Saitama, a prefecture adjacent to Tokyo, Japan. A few months after settling there, I purchased a second-hand car, which was almost essential for getting around. I took immense pleasure in embarking on lengthy, relaxing drives after work, listening to music and smoking cigarettes. One evening, during an especially long drive through the mountains, enveloped by nothing but darkness and the hum of cicadas, something unsettling transpired. I was driving with the windows rolled down, typically just the driver's side since I was smoking. As I navigated along the dimly lit, secluded road, I suddenly heard a scream. It wasn't just any scream. It had the blood-curdling, chilling quality of a child's cry. The sound continues to haunt me to this day, to the point where I hesitate to discuss it. Instinctively, I slammed on the brakes. I've never been one to believe in the supernatural, always relying on my five senses, but something felt terribly amiss. I pulled over onto the hard shoulder and stepped out of the car, feeling a shiver run down my spine. It was the dead of night, and there was no logical explanation for what I had heard. As I scanned the area for any clues, with my car's headlights piercing the darkness of the forest ahead, I was engulfed by an overwhelming sense of fear and paranoia. I began to tremble, a physical reaction I had only heard about before, but now I understood its reality all too well. Apart from the sound of my own pounding heart and the shuffle of my footsteps on the dusty road, the night was eerily silent. I tried to convince myself it was merely an auditory illusion, perhaps due to exhaustion. Hearing nothing else, I decided to drive home, attempting to put the unsettling incident behind me. 3 weeks later, while watching television, the same mountain roads and passes appeared on the screen. The newscaster reported that Suomu Miyazaki had confessed to murder, identifying the crime scene to the authorities. It became evident that the scream I had heard, although not in real time, might have been a distant echo of past horrors. That scream was no ordinary one. It was what I can only describe as an end-of-life scream, filled with terror and despair. The area where I had pulled over was shown on screen, the very site of unspeakable acts. As the details of Miyazaki's crimes were later documented by the media and by himself, the full extent of the horror was revealed. If you look up Suomu Miyazaki, you'll find chilling details, but I refuse to grant his actions any further recognition here. That experience profoundly changed me. I never took spontaneous drives through the woods again. The echo of that scream and the grim reality of what occurred in those mountains have stayed with me ever since. I was about 8 years old when this profound realization first took hold of me. The incident took place, and although my recollection of the event itself is somewhat fragmented, I can distinctly recall my mother's response, which underscores the gravity of the situation. My mother, my younger sister, and I were on a road trip traversing Wyoming, which was a familiar activity for us due to having family dispersed throughout the state. My mother particularly enjoyed long drives. Anyone acquainted with Wyoming knows that the roads there can often be quite desolate. On this specific day, we had been tailing an older green and white truck for several hours. As we neared a gas station, my little sister became thrilled at the prospect of picking up one of those wax juice bottles she adored. The green and white truck pulled into the gas station just before us. We stopped too, used the restroom, grabbed some snacks, and my mother refueled the car. Shortly thereafter, we were back on the road. Not long after, from the driver's seat, my mother asked, "Is the truck behind us the same one we followed into the gas station?" I turned around and confirmed that it indeed was the same truck, then settled back into my seat, continuing to enjoy my snacks. However, I could sense my mother's growing unease. She kept stealing glances at the truck in the rearview mirror. For the next stretch of road, the truck would accelerate, drawing dangerously close to us, then decelerate again, maintaining this erratic pattern for several miles. As we approached another gas stop, my mother spoke with a seriousness that instantly alarmed me. "I'm going to pull in and open my door as if I'm getting out. I don't want you to. Stay in the car and don't move. Just remain calm and hang on," she instructed firmly. My sister and I exchanged bewildered glances, sensing the tension in the air but not fully grasping the seriousness of the situation. We pulled into the gas station and stopped beside a pump. My mom glanced in the rearview mirror, keeping a vigilant eye on the truck as it rolled in and parked beside the entrance. The driver, a burly man, lifted the hood and began tinkering beneath it with his back turned to us. Seizing the moment, my mom slammed her door shut and sped away. I twisted in my seat, watching as the man spun around abruptly, startled by the screech of our tires. He hastily closed the hood and stared after us as we drove off. My mom accelerated faster than I had ever witnessed before. The road ahead curved sharply, and just before reaching the bend, she slammed on the brakes, jerked the steering wheel to the right, and skillfully maneuvered the car around the corner into a small parking lot hidden behind a building. We were concealed from the road but could still see the green and white truck race past, its presence nerve-wracking. Silence enveloped us until my mom broke it, asking if anyone needed to use the restroom. I replied affirmatively, but she decided it was safer to wait and drive to the next station. Then she uttered something that has stayed with me ever since, completely out of character for her. "I'd rather wet myself in this car than be killed on the side of this road." Eventually, we resumed our journey and never encountered the green and white truck again. This harrowing experience, marked by my mother's quick thinking, remains etched in my memory. The vivid memory of that night, with its blend of darkness and intense protective instincts, remains etched in my mind. A stark reminder of the perils that can lurk along deserted roads. It was around April 2005, and I had just left a friend's house, making my way home. He lived near Lake Ariel in Lane County, Pennsylvania, about 15 miles away from where I resided. To save time and avoid encountering any police officers, I opted to take the back roads. As I crossed Mountain Road, I noticed a van pulled off to the side, with its doors ajar and lights blazing. It was well past midnight, and the road was deserted. I slowed down my 1989 VW convertible, shifting into first gear, scanning for any individuals who might be injured. The woods were eerily silent, and although the van was motionless, all its lights were aglow. Even the driver's door was swung open. I recalled thinking to myself that I wouldn't have cell service until reaching the mountain summit, where I planned to contact the authorities. So, I continued driving towards the area where I knew I could get a signal, traveling at perhaps 30 miles per hour at most. The situation already felt unsettling, but it soon escalated. No more than 3 miles further, as the roadside brush thinned out, offering a clearer view of the forest, I spotted movement. Easing off the accelerator, I thought I might avoid hitting a deer. At that moment, a man, drenched in fresh blood, emerged from the tree line and onto the road. He was so thoroughly covered in gore that I couldn't initially discern he was a man. He staggered in front of my car, frantically waving me down. In my convertible, with the top down, I saw him shouting and clutching at my door. Panicked, I shifted back into first gear and sped away. Another mile or so down the road, I finally had cell service. I called the police as the man was clearly injured, and his attempt to grab my door frightened me. There was an open area on the mountain where I agreed to wait for the authorities. They arrived in less than 10 minutes. While waiting, I raised the convertible top and secured the doors. An officer recorded my statement and inspected my vehicle with a flashlight. The man from the woods had left a bloody streak on my door. Another officer discovered the van, but they couldn't find the man who had emerged from the woods. The police allowed me to go home, assuring me they would contact me if they needed further information. A few days later, I received a call informing me that the van was stolen, and they asked if I could describe the man. They never located him that night, and as far as I know, they never did. Apparently, the van was indeed stolen, and the man had bandaged himself and fled in a hurry. To this day, I remain vigilant for a bloodied man emerging from the woods. This experience has stayed with me, and it is entirely true. I've been in a relationship with my girlfriend for several years. She's a petite blonde with an unwaveringly positive outlook on everything. We attend different colleges, hers in New Hampshire and mine in Massachusetts. Since she doesn't own a car, I make the drive to visit her in my old, little red car, which I inherited from my grandmother. While I'm not particularly fond of the vehicle, I can't complain since it was free. I've never had any issues with the hour-and-a-half drive, but a few weeks ago, I encountered more than I had anticipated. I was on my way to see my girlfriend. As the day drew to a close, it was already becoming quite challenging. We had hoped to have the dorm room to ourselves, but our roommate refused to leave, so we ended up spending time in the common area instead. After most of the day together, it was finally time for me to return to my own college. I bid her farewell and promised to text her once I arrived. It was 6 p.m., and darkness was settling in, typical for winter evenings. I usually opt for the New Hampshire back roads to enjoy a more scenic drive and bypass traffic, which doesn't alter the travel time at all, so that's a bonus. Most residents or visitors to New Hampshire are aware that these back roads are often poorly illuminated, if at all, which isn't a significant issue since I can simply use my high beams. About 30 minutes into my journey, I turned onto a road that resembled a wide path. According to the GPS, I would remain on this road for roughly 7 miles, and being familiar with the quirks of New Hampshire roads, I didn't find it unusual. The road was just wide enough for a car and a half, flanked by dense woods, and completely devoid of streetlights. After traveling around 3 or 4 miles, my high beams picked up a man standing in the middle of the road, signaling for my car to stop and asking for assistance. The road was too narrow to maneuver around him, forcing me to halt. The man approached my driver's side window and motioned for me to lower it. Not thinking entirely clearly, I rolled the window down halfway. He appeared to be an average man, likely between 40 and 45 years old. However, he exuded a disconcerting aura. He informed me that he was experiencing vehicle difficulties and requested that I exit my car to assist him. As a 19-year-old with an average physique and no expertise in automobiles, I informed him that I was clueless about car mechanics. I mentioned that if he genuinely needed assistance, the best I could do was contact a mechanic or a tow truck. Nevertheless, he persistently gestured towards his dilapidated black pickup truck and insisted that I step out to lend a hand. This began to send shivers down my spine, and I was unsure of how to proceed. It was at that moment that I noticed someone crouched behind the truck. The man was oblivious to this, but inside, I was beginning to panic. My fight-or-flight instincts surged, and I decided to attempt something daring. I told the man I would pull over further up the road and then get out to see how I could assist him. This seemed to placate him, and he smiled as he backed away from my car. Seizing the opportunity, I pressed the gas pedal to the floor and sped away, glancing in my rearview mirror to see both men stepping onto the road, standing there bewildered. I continued to drive as fast as I could until I reached a nearby gas station, where I stopped to alert the police. I recounted my experience to the dispatcher and inquired whether I needed to remain for questioning. They assured me that officers would be dispatched to investigate the area and that I was free to continue my journey. Relieved, I called my girlfriend to relay the incident to her. She was just grateful for my safety. I have no idea. I was uncertain about the true intentions of those men. Were they genuinely experiencing car troubles? Or was I about to fall victim to a carjacking or something even worse? Needless to say, after that harrowing night, I vowed never to drive the back roads alone at night again. This incident occurred almost 2 decades ago, yet it remains etched in my memory. I attended college in a tiny town in northwestern Maryland, where our school was nestled in the foothills of the Catoctin Mountains. My friends and I frequently drove through the mountainous terrain, growing quite familiar with the roads. However, this particular story takes place before we had mastered those routes, back when we had just started school. One evening, several of my girlfriends and I decided to go for a drive. The roads were winding and narrow, with certain sections precariously dropping off the side of the mountain. Since it was nighttime, we proceeded with caution. We rarely encountered other vehicles during our drives, which suited us perfectly. However, that night, as we pulled into the parking lot, another car entered as well. We didn't give it much thought, assuming it was someone else seeking solitude. We ventured onto the back roads, and initially the car was no longer behind us. But as we ventured deeper into the mountains, the car reappeared, trailing closely. It was so close that we became increasingly anxious. Bear in mind, we weren't yet familiar with the roads, which were unpaved and lacked any convenient spots to turn around. I attempted to drive as swiftly as possible to distance ourselves from the vehicle, but we were all on edge, our anxiety mounting. Convinced that this individual was intent on harming us, we finally spotted a chapel with an adjacent parking lot. We quickly pulled in, turned to face the road, and watched as a red-haired man drove past, gazing at us intently. We hastily descended the mountain, parked the car, and contacted public safety to report the incident. The following day, we received an email from campus security warning us to be vigilant for a man with red hair, glasses, and a beard. He had been attempting to enter campus buildings and was reportedly following women around. Although it might seem somewhat uneventful since we managed to evade him so easily, I am thoroughly convinced that had he caught us when we were parked, we might never have been seen again. I had arranged for a taxi from a reputable taxi company to take me from a friend's house to my own in the early evening. It was dusk when the driver arrived. As I left the house to enter the car, he approached to escort me. For some reason, as he turned to lead me back to the vehicle, he briefly touched my shoulder with his hand. It wasn't a lingering touch, but it felt intentional. My immediate reaction was to wonder why this man was touching my shoulder. My intuition told me something was off, but I was in my 20s, and this man must have been in his 50s. I convinced myself that it was simply a gesture common among people of his generation. He was an older Muslim man with a pronounced Middle Eastern accent. I sat in the back seat, and the journey was supposed to last about 20 minutes from North to South London. During the first 5 minutes of the ride, as we engaged in some initial conversation, he mentioned that I was his final job for the day and that he had no plans afterward. When he said this, a pang of fear struck me. However, I reassured myself that he worked for a licensed firm, had undergone identity verification, and was authorized to perform the job. His ID card, complete with his name, photograph, and registration number, was prominently displayed on the dashboard. He was employed by a company my friend frequently used and had an account with, even though she hadn't met this specific driver before. My rational mind told me that, given his traceability, he wouldn't dare to take any risks. Moreover, it was early evening in a bustling area, which contributed to my sense of security. By this point, we were already en route. I spent the following 15 minutes or so of the journey absorbed in my phone. I'm not entirely sure why, but perhaps I was consciously trying to divert my attention because I felt anxious. Yet, I considered my anxiety to be unfounded. This was the early 2000s, so the phone was quite basic by today's standards. Nevertheless, there must have been a game or something else on it that captivated me, as I didn't glance out the window for some time. When I eventually did look outside, expecting to be near my home, I was shocked to find ourselves in a deserted part of town unfamiliar to me. This area was certainly not on the route from my friend's house to my home. The drive should have been a straightforward journey through central London, yet here we were in a very isolated area with what appeared to be abandoned housing estates. In a state of apprehension, surrounded by abandoned vehicles, I glanced over at the driver to inquire about our location. However, before I could utter a word, I observed his eyes darting left and right down the shadowy alleys we were passing. Our pace began to decelerate, and I noticed his breathing was unusually erratic, almost disturbingly loud. It was then that a profound sense of peril washed over me. He seemed to be searching for a secluded spot to pull over. At that moment, a distinct voice in my mind warned me of his sinister intentions. He was planning to harm me and then end my life. I needed to act swiftly, so I exclaimed, "I don't know where we are." He remained silent. I quickly added that my friend had insisted I call her once I was safely home and that I should have been there by now. I explained I needed to contact her to let her know I wasn't home yet. Otherwise, she would alert his company and the police because she's quite extreme in that manner. This revelation appeared to shock him into reconsidering the repercussions of his intended actions. These were the early days of mobile phones, a period when not everyone possessed one, particularly among the older generation. Perhaps it was a lifeline he hadn't anticipated I might use. With this threat looming, he abruptly turned the vehicle away from the desolate area, eventually steering us onto a main road. After some time, I began to recognize familiar landmarks as we headed toward my home. He murmured an apology. "I'm sorry if I made you worried." Yet there was something off about his tone, and I sensed that this wasn't the conclusion of the ordeal. As we neared my residence, I resolved that I didn't want him to drop me off directly outside my door, considering that I lived with my family. My sister was staying at her boyfriend's house that night, and we lived in a communal block. I was worried he might attempt to enter through the main front door to gain access to my flat. So, I asked if he could drop me off at the store on the next street. He had no choice but to agree. I went into the store and lingered there for a while. I remember being completely broke during those times, and my friend had paid for the ride using her account. After a few minutes, I left the store and walked the 3 to 4 minutes back to my flat. As I neared the flat, I noticed a car parked facing the main entrance and thought, "Oh my God, it's him." I realized he would clearly see I hadn't bought anything, as I didn't even have a bag, which would reveal my lie. As I passed the car, I couldn't bring myself to turn around and look at him. I took out my keys, quickened my pace, and swiftly entered my flat. Once inside, I mustered the courage to glance out the window, and sure enough, it was that guy. He had driven from where he dropped me off to my flat and was sitting in his car, staring at it. Just then, my friend called, and I told her I had just gotten home. She couldn't believe how long it had taken. I explained the entire situation to her. While I was on the phone with her, I looked out the window again and saw that he had finally left. I didn't report any of this at the time, and from my safe vantage point 20 years later, I regret not doing so. Yet, despite everything, I still doubted my instincts even then. His unwavering intuition in the courtroom lingered. After the incident, I convinced myself it was merely a moment of irrational panic, and soon my rational mind took over. My logical reasoning also suggested that if I were to report him, nothing would come of it, as he hadn't technically committed any wrongdoing. I couldn't substantiate any claims, and even if he confessed to taking a detour, he could simply argue that he made a wrong turn and would likely deny returning to my apartment. Reporting him might have caused problems for him, and knowing he was aware of my address frightened me even more. After that, I became perpetually cautious around my apartment, and fortunately, I never encountered him again. Reflecting on it now and understanding more about grooming tactics, I realize I should have reported it. I am aware that nothing might have changed, as every level of government had been concealing such assaults for years, and I might have inadvertently endangered myself further. Nonetheless, I should have reported it for the sake of others, and I regret not taking action. This transpired several years ago when I was tending bar during my college days. It was around 3 a.m. when I was driving home along a stretch of divided highway and noticed a car speeding toward me in the wrong lane. Initially, I doubted myself, thinking the vehicle was on the opposite side of the highway. However, a white Ford sedan whizzed past me at an alarming speed. It's important to mention that I also drive a white Ford sedan. Having grown accustomed to encountering inebriated and reckless drivers late at night, I pulled over to the side of the road to let him pass. Then, I experienced a moment of clarity, and decided to contact the police, fearing that this individual might harm themselves or another person. After I provided the dispatcher with the road and long marker details, they assured me they would dispatch a unit. The state police station was only a few exits away, so I assumed they would send someone promptly. I continued my journey home, merging back onto the highway. As I got back on the road, I noticed some headlights several miles behind me. Living in a rural area of southeastern Pennsylvania, traffic at 3 a.m. is usually limited to truckers and law enforcement. The car behind me gained speed as I accelerated, so I stayed in the right lane, expecting it to pass. Instead, they turned on their high beams, making driving uncomfortable, and began tailgating me closely. At this point, I assumed I was about to be pulled over by the police, considering I had reported a different white Ford sedan earlier. I reached into my glove compartment for my registration. Suddenly, the car behind me screeched to a halt in the middle of the highway. They must have switched off their vehicle because the lights disappeared, and I saw what appeared to be the same Ford sedan from earlier. Still, I thought it might be a police car, possibly mistaking my actions for reaching for a weapon in the glove compartment. Panicked, I dialed 911 for the second time and inquired whether they had dispatched a cruiser to investigate. The dispatcher, sounding slightly curt, reassured me that they had indeed sent someone. I explained that someone was following me and behaving oddly. It might be a police officer. I worried I might have startled them when I obtained my registration, as the dispatcher attempted to contact the trooper they had dispatched. The car raced towards me, halting mere inches from my bumper with its high beams glaring and brakes screeching. I informed the dispatcher that I was fairly certain the vehicle behind me was not a police car. Once more, the car surged to my bumper, switched on its high beams, and blared its horn. When the dispatcher inquired about the situation, I explained that the blaring horn was coming from the car tailing me, and that I doubted it was a patrol vehicle. I resolved not to worry about being pulled over and began to accelerate. If they activated their lights, I would comply and pull over. I attempted to signal my intent to exit, but then abruptly changed my mind. Yet they continued to pursue me at the next exit. I took the off-ramp, transitioned onto the on-ramp, and the car persistently followed. During this chase, I contemplated driving through a wall, as it was the only gas station bustling with activity in southern Pennsylvania at that late hour. Nevertheless, both the dispatcher and I agreed that this would be risky. She remained composed and engaged another person, likely a supervisor, who was coordinating efforts to send law enforcement to my location. This individual suggested I drive to the state police station. Realizing I was just one exit away, I informed her of my plan to head there, and she assured me that troopers would be waiting for me outside. As I exited the highway, the car continued to trail me closely. I ran a few red lights in my rush to reach the police station, while the car attempted to switch lanes, either to overtake me or pull up beside me. As soon as the police station came into view, I activated my turn signal. The car behind me abruptly hit the brakes, turned off its headlights, and then veered into a nearby parking lot. The story concludes in an unexpectedly anticlimactic manner. When I pulled into the police station, I was greeted by two state troopers who set off to locate the car, while I remained with a third officer. I expressed my gratitude to the dispatcher and the supervisor, and a state trooper kindly escorted me home after recording my statement. I was never contacted for further investigation or to testify, so I assume the individual was never apprehended. I am an elderly man now, but this event transpired when I was much younger. I felt compelled to recount this story in the hope that it might assist someone. One evening, I drove to a secluded tourist spot and parked my vehicle in its lot. I was by myself and had no particular plans for the night. Around 8 p.m., a wave of sleepiness overtook me, and I eventually drifted off. I'm unsure how long I slept, but I was roused by a tapping noise at my window. As I awoke with a stiff neck, I turned my head toward the source of the sound. A young woman stood at my driver's side door, tapping frantically on the glass. She appeared to be alone. Still confused and groggy, I heard her voice. I cautiously cracked the window open, and she desperately pleaded for assistance, urging me to unlock the door. She claimed a man had been pursuing her. I was convinced of the situation's reality, despite having just awoken. For a fleeting moment, I thought I might be witnessing a ghost, but that notion quickly dissipated. This was undeniably real. As the situation unfolded, I quickly unlocked and opened the door to offer assistance, but then I hesitated. Something felt amiss. Her hair, makeup, and attire were impeccably arranged. There wasn't a single hair out of place, no makeup smudges, and she wasn't perspiring as one might expect after being pursued. Though she appeared frantic and terrified, her demeanor seemed somewhat contrived, as if she had rehearsed her lines before arriving. Felt like a performance. Scanning the area from inside the car, I noticed there was no one else nearby, nor were there any other vehicles in the parking lot. Fear gripped me, and a part of me genuinely wanted to help, imagining myself in her situation or if she were a family member. However, I couldn't shake off my skepticism about her story. I opted to start my engine, intending to use my headlights to verify her claims. I saw nothing ahead of my car, but when I adjusted my rearview mirror, something caught my attention. I noticed several figures, judging by their silhouettes, crouching behind my car like runners poised at the starting line. When the woman realized I had spotted them, she quickly glanced back at them. I slammed on the gas and sped away from the park. Driving was initially challenging because I had adjusted my seat for sleep earlier. Once I was far enough from the parking area, I checked the time and saw it was just past 2 a.m. It dawned on me that those men were likely trying to remain hidden in my blind spot, fully aware of their actions. Had I unlocked the door, I might have been robbed, or something even worse could have occurred. The experience that night taught me to always park in well-lit areas near surveillance cameras. Nowadays, I prefer to position my car in the center of parking lots. Since that incident, I've avoided sleeping in my vehicle in questionable locations like that parking lot. If I do decide to rest in my car, I ensure it's in a place abundant with lights, restrooms, vending machines, and cameras. One positive takeaway from that night is the realization that the woman did not actually require my assistance, as she was neither abducted nor pursued. While her deceitfulness bothers me, I am relieved she wasn't in any danger. This is a tale my mother often recounted about an event that transpired when I was very young, certainly before I reached the age of 5. My recollections of the incident are hazy, primarily because my mother tried to shield me from the distress at the time. To provide some background, our family was dispersed across the country, and much of my childhood involved traveling from one state to another to visit relatives. We were experienced travelers. Additionally, as a child, I was exceptionally outgoing, often hugging strangers spontaneously and expressing love with an abundance of joy and warmth. However, there was one stranger I instinctively avoided upon first sight, and this is the story of that encounter. My mother was taking me to visit some relatives while my father stayed home with my brothers. She also needed to house sit, and generally she was more attentive to me than my father, so it made sense for me to accompany her. After several hours of driving, we finally stopped at a rest area to use the restroom. There was a man in the parking lot. As soon as we stepped out of the car, I noticed a man in the parking lot who appeared to be observing everyone coming and going. His attention shifted to us immediately. Holding my mother's hand, I instinctively let go and moved to hold her other hand, positioning myself further from the man. Reflecting on this later, my mom realized that even at my young age, I had sensed some danger and wanted to keep my distance from him. I hurried both to the restroom and back to the car, behavior that was entirely out of character for me, especially around strangers. Upon returning to the car, we noticed the man had retreated to his own vehicle but began tailing us as soon as we drove away. My mom quickly realized we were being followed and attempted to evade him on the highway. Despite her efforts, he persisted, continually closing the gap between our vehicles. Amid this tense situation, a semi-truck driver noticed my mom's erratic driving and the evident urgency, even from his vantage point behind us. Grasping the seriousness of our predicament, he pulled up alongside us. He and my mom exchanged a look that conveyed their mutual understanding. The trucker then used his radio to alert other drivers, explaining our dire circumstances. In response, several truckers from nearby routes converged on our highway, strategically positioning themselves to block the man's car, effectively isolating him from us. My mom took advantage of this opportunity to exit the highway, heading to another rest stop with the initial truck driver closely following behind. Once safely stopped, the truck driver approached us to confirm the situation. The truck driver reassured us that everything was fine and even escorted us to a Burger King for a meal. We conversed for a bit, and he remained with us on the road until it was safe for us to go our separate ways. I am profoundly thankful to that truck driver and the others who came to our rescue, likely saving our lives. Thank you. I used to reside in a county that was largely rural until the past decade or so. The largest town in our county has now become overcrowded, which I find displeasing. I relocated from there to the countryside. I appreciate living here, although it can be quite eerie at night due to the vast stretches of darkness with no streetlights. One notable thing about this county is that the main roads become congested quickly, especially in the event of an accident, so it's beneficial to take the back roads. Like any rural area, these back roads are less populated, darker, and bordered by numerous trees, with no sidewalks in sight. A few years ago, an incident nearly discouraged me from using these routes altogether. Late one night, I was driving home and chose to take a particular back road that shaved 10 minutes off my commute. I was exhausted and needed to wake up early, so I was speeding, eager to get home quickly. This road is slightly more populated than others, but certain stretches are quite eerie because massive trees line the road, their branches and leaves forming towering canopies. As I sped through and navigated a curve, I noticed something up ahead that I initially thought was a giant garden flag, the type that people place in their yards during spring. It seemed like a peculiar flag because it was quite large. Tall and imposing, the figure stood in the middle of the road. As I drew nearer, the beams from my headlights illuminated the scene, revealing that it wasn't a flag as I'd initially thought, but a person, a woman. Clad in a striking red vest, she was a rare sight in rural Maryland, where such attire isn't commonplace. Her long, flowing white dress and the bright orange reflective sash crossing her chest seemed out of place, especially since she was positioned right in the middle of the street. As I drove by, the situation only grew stranger. Despite the dim light, I could discern that she appeared to be around 60, wearing glasses and possessing vivid blue eyes. She peered through my passenger window, performing an odd balancing act that sent a chill down my spine. It seemed as though she might attempt to enter my vehicle. Mind you, I was driving at quite a speed. Something about her unnerved me deeply. I didn't fear she would rob me. Rather, I was genuinely frightened she might be something otherworldly, a soul snatcher or a skinwalker. Her presence was so unsettling that I couldn't convincingly classify her as human. Words failed to fully capture how eerie she was. I accelerated past her as quickly as I could, constantly checking the back seat to ensure she hadn't somehow materialized inside my car. I prayed, recited scripture, and kept a vigilant eye on the rearview mirror. It was spring, and the air should have been warmer, yet a bone-chilling cold enveloped me. Upon finally reaching home, I rushed to share the unnerving encounter with my mom. To my surprise, my brother was already recounting a similar story to her. He, too, had seen this peculiar woman while driving, but his encounter occurred at the intersection leading from the highway to the back road, whereas I had seen her further along the route. Both of us had identical reactions to her presence. She had also attempted to peer into his car, exhibiting the same uncanny behavior. When he noticed her, he remarked that there had been a car in front of him that had sped away startlingly quickly as they passed the woman. My brother was so unnerved by the experience that he has since refused to travel that route, even in broad daylight. Eventually, I discovered that the woman resides in the woods. Apparently, at one time, her family lived along that road. Her father had been gravely ill, and she tried to rush him to the hospital, but he passed away en route. She then drove around with his body in her vehicle for hours. It seems she has mental health challenges, and I believe she either lost her home or was forced to leave. I have friends who live near that street, and when I mentioned the situation, they immediately knew whom I was referring to. I still use that road occasionally, but I haven't encountered her since. I sincerely hope she is all right, though I am not eager to meet her again. Years ago, over a Memorial Day weekend, I endured a nerve-wracking drive from Las Vegas to Los Angeles with two companions. After a long weekend of revelry in Vegas, we faced what is typically a 5-hour drive through the desert, which can extend to 7 or even 9 hours on particularly busy weekends. Recovering from a 3-day escapade, the journey was bound to be tough. Our friends, who were flying out, persuaded us to stay longer to dodge the worst of the traffic. We indulged in a buffet and lounged by the pool, hoping to recuperate before setting off at 3 p.m., with plans to be home by 8 p.m. However, 2 accidents and heavy congestion severely delayed us. It took us 6 hours just to reach Barstow, which usually would have been about 2 hours away. After refueling and grabbing some coffee, we resumed our journey at 10 p.m. As the clock ticked past midnight, the heavy traffic and a misguided turn had us finding ourselves on the road at 2:30 a.m. We were passing through Santa Clarita, roughly a 45-minute drive from where we intended to be, when suddenly a deafening noise pierced the night. It sounded like metal tearing apart, followed by an explosive crash. I managed to steer the vehicle off the highway onto a side street and promptly contacted roadside assistance. They estimated a 30-minute wait, which seemed reasonable given the situation. The area was dotted with numerous gated communities. Yet the road we found ourselves on was deserted, serving as a thoroughfare connecting these neighborhoods. About 15 minutes later, I was startled awake by an SUV passing in the opposite direction. It had about 4 occupants, all of whom were fixated on us as they drove by. Shortly thereafter, the assistance service called back, informing me of a mix-up. They had mistakenly thought I was in Santa Clara, 6 hours north in the San Francisco region. They mentioned it would take another hour for help to reach us. We decided to try and rest again, but roughly half an hour later, the same SUV sped past us once more, this time shining a light into our car, which heightened my suspicion. For protection, I always kept a utility knife and a small bat under my seat. I took the knife and handed the bat to my half-asleep and bewildered friend in the passenger seat. 15 minutes later, the SUV came to a stop about 300 feet behind us, turning off its lights as the occupants began conversing in animated tones that amplified our apprehension. Stranded and outnumbered, we sat there, devising strategies and steeling ourselves against the growing fear. I observed as 2 large men, clad in black, emerged from the SUV. Vehicle 1 was parked at the side, its driver leaning against the grille, a cigarette perched between his lips as he watched us intently. Meanwhile, the other occupant was relieving himself on the sidewalk, making the whole situation feel like a psychological ploy. After some time, the passenger finished his business, exchanged a few words with the driver, and then 2 more individuals emerged from the car, one noticeably shorter and the other rather large. They began to approach us. In anticipation, I gripped my knife firmly. My friend positioned himself to defend with a bat, and my other companion balled his fists, prepared for a potential altercation. The group halted midway, just as the headlights of a tow truck glimmered in the distance. They swiftly retreated to their SUV and sped away as the tow truck operator arrived. We didn't make it home until 5 a.m., still puzzled by the group's intentions. Perhaps they assumed the car was deserted and aimed to steal it, or maybe they harbored more sinister plans. It's possible they mistook my long-haired friend in the back seat for a woman. The whole incident was intense, and the lesson I learned was to never leave Las Vegas late at night when you're driving. I once picked up a hitchhiker who turned out to be genuinely unhinged. I vowed never to do that again, and I hope my experience serves as a cautionary tale for you. I reside in a foreign country and am unaware of your nation's health measures against the epidemic, but at that time we were no longer under lockdown. This occurred in September 2 years ago. I was driving from my parents' house to a friend's apartment close to a college campus, a journey of an hour and a half. We had arranged to spend the weekend together after not having seen each other for quite some time. Despite the fact that the incident had no connection to my friend, it suddenly struck me how perilous it truly was. As I began recounting the events, I recall one of them remarking, "This must have been the most harrowing 45-minute journey of my life." At the time, I laughed it off, but now I realize just how accurate that statement was. I departed quite late that evening, around 9 p.m. I remember the sun had already dipped below the horizon, and I was on track to arrive late, which I wasn't fond of, though I was familiar with the route as I frequently traveled it. For context, it was a 90-minute drive, and I typically paused halfway at a McDonald's parking lot to enjoy a cigarette before continuing. Keep this in mind for later. I spotted the hitchhiker shortly after leaving my parents' house. I had been driving for roughly 10 to 15 minutes when I noticed him at the exit of a roundabout. He appeared to be a tall, slender man with one of those small shoulder bags slung across his chest. I initially assumed he was a guy in his 20s who had been dropped off by friends after a party or something, which was a silly thought, as it was far too early for any party to have concluded. Yet that was my immediate assumption. Feeling a sudden sense of empathy, I pulled over and lowered the passenger side window to ask where he was headed. Instantly, I realized he was much older than I had first thought, likely in his 30s. His face was exceedingly pale, and the way he gazed at me was honestly unsettling. The man was traveling in the same direction as I was, toward the town where I usually stopped midway to rest. I felt a bit uneasy. Honestly, I just reacted instinctively when I responded. It was on my route, and he got into the car. Then, I endured the most harrowing 45 minutes of my life. I don't mean to exaggerate, but it genuinely was a nightmare. I realized immediately that I had made a grave error as I drove away, because the moment we started moving, he clutched his stomach tightly, hunched over in the passenger seat, rocking back and forth and muttering that he wasn't feeling well. I offered to roll down the window to let in some fresh air, but he insisted he merely needed to take his medication. Saying that I felt uneasy would be an understatement. I remember thinking I had really messed up and that, regardless of what happened, I should not stop the car under any circumstances. The first thing I did was ask if he would be okay if I dropped him off at the McDonald's in town. I think he agreed, but it didn't matter much because I had no intention of stopping anywhere else. I was already on edge. I decided to pretend to concentrate on the road and try to appear as composed as possible. He kept talking the entire time. I can't recall the exact sequence of events, but I remember he asked if he could see my nails, to which I replied that I was driving. He apologized and assured me I had nothing to worry about, as he had never attacked anyone. He told me his girlfriend was angry with him and wanted to break up if he didn't return home. He inquired about my destination, my plans for the evening, and if I intended to take a long, hot shower. He continued by asking if I had a boyfriend and how we liked to spend our time together. I told him that was personal and, initially, I hesitated to respond, but he nodded and shared that he used to be like me until he was arrested. He insisted twice that cars were tailing us. Then he inquired if I smoked, and when I said no, he offered me a cigarette. I politely declined, but he left one on the dashboard anyway. At one moment, he took out his phone to show me a picture of himself and another of his mother, whom he described as beautiful. I glanced at the screen briefly. It was damaged, with several straight black lines and distorted pixels. The left side had a reddish tint, while the right was yellowish, giving the image an unsettling appearance. He became upset because I only took a quick look and began raising his voice, accusing me of not caring about what he was saying. I calmly explained that I was listening but couldn't watch because I was driving. This seemed to appease him, and he quickly apologized, offering to show me another picture. He then asked if the car was mine. I told him it belonged to my parents, not wanting him to assume I was wealthy or had any substantial means. I'm just a young student with no money, trying to keep to myself. I lied, saying I had hit a deer the previous week to emphasize that I needed to concentrate and avoid damaging my parents' car. I silently hoped he would quiet down at some point. He was staring directly at me and muttered, "Poor thing," only to straighten up abruptly and point to a road sign, hurriedly correcting himself to say he meant the road sign, not me. Honestly, at that moment, I was contemplating that if he ever attempted anything, I would consider crashing the car. Reflecting on the incident, I remember contemplating steering us both into a tree. As much as it shames me to admit it, I didn't want him to escape this situation unscathed. He screamed out that he was Archangel Michael and demanded to know my name. I gave him a false one. He repeatedly asked if I remembered his name, and suddenly, in a fit of panic, he crouched down, rocking back and forth, insisting that I should recognize him. I simply replied with "okay," because truthfully, it was all I could manage to say. Eventually, when we reached the city where he needed to disembark, he requested I take him to the train station. It was nearly 10 p.m., and I was aware there were no trains running, no lights illuminating the area, and certainly no other cars indicating human presence. I reminded him that we agreed to stop at the McDonald's, and he nodded, agreeing with a repetitive "yes, yes." He complimented my kindness and placed a coin on the dashboard, beside the cigarette. I halted in the parking lot, not bothering to park properly, just stopping in the middle of the road where I felt most vulnerable. He exited with a casual "see you later," and I sped away quickly. I never saw or heard from him again. This peculiar event occurred during my university years, while returning from a trip with a friend. I suspect I misinterpreted the map, leading us down an unintended shortcut, and we found ourselves lost amidst the mountain roads. My friend was behind the wheel, and I was supposed to navigate, which was my sole responsibility. It was around 8 p.m., but the darkness had already settled in due to the looming shadows of the mountains. Noticing a white truck ahead, I remarked to my friend that if we followed it, we might find our way back. Our car accelerated as well, confirming our suspicions. It felt like we were in a thriller, with the tension climbing steadily. If we could just find a paved road, we might have a chance to escape this bizarre pursuit. The anxiety in the car was palpable as we navigated the treacherous path, my friend gripping the steering wheel tightly. We had originally thought that trailing the truck would lead us back to civilization quickly, a seemingly sound plan given our lack of orientation in these remote mountain terrains. However, the roads transformed from paved to gravel, narrowing into single-lane tracks. The truck, evidently built for such rugged conditions, had sped away, vanishing into the wilderness, leaving us bewildered in its dusty wake. It was unsettling, almost implausible, for the truck to disappear so abruptly, with nothing but the bleak mountain paths stretching out before us. The thought lingered in my mind, yet our main focus remained finding a way back to the main road. I fumbled with a map, a flashlight awkwardly clamped between my teeth, as we had no cell phone signal to rely on. As we ventured further into the unknown, I glimpsed some lights in our rearview mirror. It was the same white truck we had been following earlier, now trailing us instead. I informed my friend, and together we kept a vigilant eye on the truck through our mirrors. The eerie situation was starting to get under our skin, especially when the truck suddenly switched off its headlights. Could it really navigate these serpentine mountain roads without lights? It was becoming increasingly unnerving. I was anxious, and my friend seemed even more so. I voiced the obvious, stating that the truck from before was indeed following us. The moment those words left my mouth, I felt a surge of adrenaline. My friend fidgeted uneasily, then decided to accelerate, attempting to test our hypothesis. The truck behind us mirrored our speed, confirming our fears. We accelerated to catch the vehicle that still had its lights off, unsure of what to do next. As we began to argue, the tension in the air was palpable. Suddenly, the truck trailing us seemed to vanish, leaving us feeling utterly defeated. Whoever was driving that truck clearly knew the roads well. I deeply regretted our decision to follow that individual. We continued along the narrow road, keeping a vigilant eye out for any opportunity to turn back, exchanging snappy and sarcastic remarks about how we might escape this predicament. Then, as if materializing from thin air, the truck swerved back into our lane and abruptly hit the brakes. My friend reacted swiftly, and once more we found ourselves trailing the white truck. He remarked that if we didn't act soon, the situation would end disastrously. It was the most stressful experience I had ever encountered. A few moments later, we reached a stretch where the road widened, and my friend seized the opportunity. With a sharp maneuver, we executed a U-turn, though the limited space caused my friend's car to graze the guardrail during our escape. We noticed certain points along the road where the truck could have vanished and reappeared ahead of us, which explained how it was possible. However, the question of why this person was doing this to us remained unanswered. We were aware that we were heading back toward civilization, so my friend pressed the accelerator while I nervously glanced over my shoulder, checking if the truck was pursuing us. I kept urging him to increase the speed, even though I understood he couldn't, and that the truck could emerge unexpectedly at any moment. So, we continued down those desolate roads until eventually, the surroundings became tangible once more, and I noticed the glow emanating from the windows of homes. It wasn't long before we stumbled upon an independent gas station. My companion immediately drove in, bringing the car to a screeching halt. He dashed inside and urgently seized the attendant by the arm, hurriedly explaining our predicament. He implored the man to contact the police and provide directions to escape these treacherous mountain roads. The attendant seemed disinterested in our desperate plea, so we urged him to step outside. My friend then insisted, "Believe us, someone is pursuing us. If a white truck with its lights off appears any moment now, will you finally believe us?" Just as he finished speaking, the truck emerged, still shrouded in darkness, coming to a screeching halt just a few meters from the gas station. It slowly pivoted and vanished back into the shadows. We couldn't catch a glimpse of the driver, but we did notice something: a logo and some writing on the truck's side. The gas station clerk finally grasped our situation, remarking, "Oh, now I understand. You're dealing with the guys from the church, or perhaps cult, is a more fitting term." I pressed him for further details, discovering that the entire mountain was apparently their domain. They owned a village where both leaders and followers resided together. I was aware of the existence of cults but couldn't fathom why the truck was pursuing us. I inquired why they were following us, and according to the elderly man at the gas station, there were frequent attempts by cult members to flee after a change of heart. The cult is highly cautious about vehicles approaching their village. Their reckless driving and relentless pursuit of anyone nearing the community are rumored to be the cause of numerous accidents in this mountainous region. I recall that the cult gained significant media attention a few years back, but it seems they have since gone silent. I suppose the man who trailed us might have been on the lookout for escapees or families attempting to rescue their loved ones. It was an incredibly eerie experience. I'm Alex, a 20-year-old graphic designer residing in Denver. I've always been captivated by the serene, solitary nature of late-night drives. There's something about the world's stillness at night that helps me clear my mind and escape from the daily grind. However, a few weeks ago, what was supposed to be a routine drive turned into a haunting nightmare that continues to trouble me. It was a Saturday night in early June, and I had been working long hours on a major project at the office. Exhausted and in dire need of a break from the relentless computer screen, I decided around midnight to take a drive on Route 54. This highway meanders through the countryside just outside Denver. It's a route I've traversed many times, and despite its isolation, it has always felt safe and familiar. As I left the city, the lights of Denver gradually faded behind me, and the road stretched ahead, illuminated solely by my headlights. I had the radio playing softly, emitting some mellow tunes, and I felt the usual sense of tranquility that accompanies these drives. As I navigated through the tranquil night, about an hour into my journey, something peculiar caught my attention. A vehicle was stationed by the roadside, its hazard lights flashing intermittently. My intrigue was piqued, prompting me to decelerate. The car, a dilapidated sedan, appeared as though it had been there for quite a while. No one was in sight, making it even more unusual to encounter such a vehicle in this isolated area. Should I stop to check if they need assistance? Pondered. I've always had an inclination to aid others, yet the seclusion of this stretch of road made me wary. I continued onward, convincing myself it was likely insignificant, though I couldn't shake the sensation that something was amiss. As I pressed on, the lateness of the hour and the distance from civilization weighed on my mind. The darkness seemed denser, and the silence more suffocating. The only sounds accompanying me were the steady hum of my engine and the sporadic rustle of leaves stirred by the wind. I repeatedly glanced in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see the sedan tailing me, but there was nothing but an empty road behind. A few miles further, headlights emerged from the distance, approaching from behind. I felt a sense of relief at the sight of another vehicle, hoping they might offer some clarity regarding the abandoned sedan. As the car drew nearer, I discerned it was an old pickup truck. It sped past without hesitation, but there was something about it that left me feeling unsettled. The driver didn't even cast a glance in my direction, which was odd, considering we were the sole vehicles on this stretch of road. I tried to dismiss the disquieting sensation. Despite my initial ease and concentration on the drive, a wave of apprehension washed over me as I rounded a bend. The road was obstructed by a massive makeshift barricade constructed from wooden planks and old tires. There was no way to maneuver around it, and it appeared deliberately placed to block the path. "What the hell?" I muttered, feeling my pulse quicken. I halted the car and shifted into park, trying to figure out my next move. With no phone signal in this remote area, calling for assistance was not an option. I was utterly alone. I turned off the engine and stepped out to examine the barricade. It was roughly assembled and looked as if it hadn't been there long. My heart pounded as I contemplated how to dismantle it. Just as I was about to start pushing the planks aside, I heard a sound emanating from the woods, a low shuffling, reminiscent of footsteps dragging through the underbrush. My breath caught in my throat, and I scanned the trees, but the encroaching darkness made it impossible to see clearly. I struggled to remain calm, but the sound grew louder and closer. Suddenly, the pickup truck I had spotted earlier came into view once more. It was moving at a slow pace, as if circling back. My immediate reaction was to return to the safety of my car and lock the doors, but the necessity of clearing the road to escape was pressing. I found myself immobilized, trapped between the fear of the unknown and the pragmatic need to remove the obstacle. The truck stopped behind my vehicle, and I watched as the driver emerged. He was a man in his mid-40s, sporting a grizzled beard. He had a hardened visage as he regarded me with a curious expression before turning his attention to the barrier. A blend of relief and suspicion coursed through me. "Need some help?" he called out, his voice rough yet not unfriendly. I paused briefly before responding, "Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to move it." The man approached and began assisting me with the obstacle, and we worked in silence. My tension was palpable. I glanced at the truck and noticed a toolbox in the back, unable to shake the feeling that something was amiss about this entire situation. As we shifted the last of the planks, the man initiated a conversation. "This area's been experiencing some trouble lately," he remarked. "Strange things happening." "What kind of strange things?" I inquired, attempting to maintain a steady voice. He shrugged. "Just rumors. Folks say there are gangs around here causing trouble, taking what's not theirs, breaking into places they shouldn't. It's enough to keep people on edge." A chill crept down my spine. "I saw a car back there with its hazard lights on. Do you know anything about that?" His expression tightened, and he averted his gaze. "Nope, haven't seen it." We finished clearing the road, and he offered to accompany me until I was back on a main route. I was thankful, yet still uneasy. As we drove, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the sedan or the man's truck trailing behind me. Eventually, we reached a more populated area, illuminated by streetlights and a gas station. I expressed my gratitude to the man and continued on my way, refraining from looking back, not wanting to confirm if he was still following. As I finally reached home, I was both exhausted and rattled. The entire experience felt otherworldly, reminiscent of a scene from a horror film. I couldn't stop obsessing over the broken-down sedan, the enigmatic barricade, and the man in the pickup truck. In the following days, I attempted to unravel the mystery of what had transpired. I inquired around, yet no one seemed to have any information about peculiar incidents on Route 54. I contemplated notifying the authorities but wondered what exactly I would report to them. Reflecting on that night, I remain uncertain about what I encountered. The only conclusion I could draw was that there had been some disturbance in the area, and the man in the truck had erected the barrier to monitor who traveled along the road. The memory of that drive continues to send chills down my spine. I've since learned to exercise greater caution and to trust my instincts. Late-night drives used to be my preferred method for unwinding, but now they serve as a reminder of how swiftly things can go awry. I'm Jamie, a 32-year-old freelance photographer from Portland. I've always relished the tranquility of late-night drives, finding solace in the solitude of the road, with the bustle of city life fading behind and the vast openness ahead. However, a few nights ago, the drive I anticipated to be soothing turned into a nightmare that I can't seem to shake off. It was a Friday night around midnight when I chose to venture out of town along a rural route I often use to relax. The road is renowned for its solitude and natural beauty, and I thought it would be an ideal way to decompress. As the drive commenced seamlessly, the glow of the city gradually vanished, leaving only the beam of my headlights slicing through the enveloping darkness. The road was narrow and serpentine, bordered by dense woodland. This isolation had always felt serene to me, but tonight, an unfamiliar unease lingered in the air. I couldn't quite pinpoint the cause, yet the night seemed to carry an unusual weight. Roughly midway through the journey, my car began to falter. Initially, I dismissed it as a minor glitch, but then the engine lost all power, and the vehicle coasted to a halt. Attempts to restart it were futile, and with no cell signal, summoning roadside assistance was not an option. The gravity of the predicament began to sink in. Taking a deep breath, I retrieved my flashlight, secured the car, and set off on foot. My objective was to reach the nearest town, which I knew lay several miles ahead. The woods on either side of the road seemed to close in on me, with only my flashlight to keep me company. I trudged onward, striving to ignore the growing sense of solitude that intensified with each step. After a couple of hours, a faint light appeared in the distance. It was dim but discernible, instilling a sense of hope. I hastened my pace, my exhaustion momentarily forgotten. As I drew closer, I realized the light emanated from an old farmhouse. Though relieved, I was also apprehensive, as the place appeared abandoned and dilapidated. With no other alternatives, I knocked on the door, my heart pounding. After a few moments, the door creaked open, revealing a man in his 60s with a grizzled beard and a weary look. His eyes were sharp, and as he scrutinized me, I felt a mix of anticipation and anxiety. He appeared to scrutinize me intently. "Can I assist you?" he inquired, his voice strained with uncertainty. I explained that my car had broken down and that I had been walking for hours seeking help. The man introduced himself as Earl, and he seemed to sympathize with my plight. He agreed to assist and mentioned that he would drive me back to my car with his tow truck. As we made our way back to where my vehicle was stranded, I attempted to engage in small talk to alleviate the tension. Earl was courteous but aloof, his eyes frequently glancing at the road behind us. A sense of unease began to settle in. Why was he so on edge? Upon reaching my car, he immediately set to work, attaching it to the tow truck. I observed, feeling vulnerable due to my fatigue. Earl worked swiftly, but his actions seemed overly rehearsed, almost robotic. My discomfort intensified as he neared completion. Abruptly, he paused and turned to me. "You know," he said, "it's not safe out here at night. Many people have run into trouble. You're fortunate I happened upon you." I forced a nervous laugh and replied, "I appreciate it. I'm just thankful I found you." Earl's eyes narrowed. "You're very lucky. There are things out here you don't want to encounter." I was about to inquire further when I heard an engine roaring in the distance. Earl's demeanor changed. He appeared suddenly alert, almost apprehensive. "We need to leave," he said abruptly. Before I could respond, Earl pushed me towards the tow truck, climbing into the driver's seat himself. I barely had time to comprehend the situation before the truck jolted forward, towing my car behind it. "What's happening?" I asked, my voice trembling. He didn't respond promptly. Instead, he kept his gaze fixed on the road, his hands firmly gripping the steering wheel. "We need to get to town. There's no time for explanations." The drive was fraught with tension and silence. Every now and then, I glanced at the rearview mirror, spotting the truck trailing us right at the spot we just left. A growing unease gnawed at me. Who were those people, and why was Earl so determined to stay clear of them? As we neared the edge of town, Earl finally broke the silence. "They're the reason I distance myself from others, why I prefer solitude. They're dangerous." I was perplexed. "What do you mean? Who are those people?" Earl shook his head. "It's better if you don't know. Just steer clear of this area. It's not safe for someone like you." He dropped me off at a gas station on the town's outskirts. I thanked him, though my gratitude was clouded by confusion and apprehension. Earl didn't linger for my reply. He drove off swiftly, leaving me with an inescapable sense of foreboding. I eventually arranged for my car to be towed to a nearby mechanic and made my way home, feeling drained and unsettled. The night's events replayed incessantly in my mind as I tried to make sense of what had transpired, but the fear remained palpable. I still don't know what Earl was concealing or who those people were, but I'm certain that night was more than just a series of unfortunate events. I've become more vigilant during my nighttime drives and now avoid that stretch of road altogether. It is no longer my serene retreat. I wish you had been more open that night, but for anyone venturing out there, I advise caution. Some mysteries are best left untouched, and certain paths should be avoided, especially when the darkness conceals more than you can fathom. To set the scene, I must share my passion for driving. I adore embarking on long drives to nowhere, without a particular destination. Just me, my music, and the open road. Living in Nebraska, I frequently take secluded back roads and quiet highways that meander through the countryside, leading to small towns and eventually larger cities. I typically embark on these journeys at night when traffic is sparse and there's less to worry about. Since obtaining my driver's license 5 years ago, I've never encountered any problems or found myself in any precarious situations. That was until a few nights ago. For context, I am a relatively petite 22-year-old woman, and as I've mentioned, I often undertake these drives entirely alone. They provide a valuable opportunity to clear my mind when I'm stressed, upset, or overwhelmed, or to formulate a plan to tackle personal dilemmas. In the past, these solitary drives also served as an escape from the toxic environment of my parents' home, where I coped with their struggles with alcoholism. Now that I've moved out and am in a much healthier mental state, I no longer feel the compulsion to hop in my car and drive aimlessly. However, on the night in question, I was feeling particularly overwhelmed, stressed, and anxious due to a series of personal issues I prefer not to delve into. I felt uneasy and irritable around my boyfriend, unable to concentrate on anything else. I decided that a drive might help clear my mind. My boyfriend was understanding, cautioning me to be careful and not to stay out too long since night was approaching. I agreed, kissed him goodbye, and left. I cruised around our city for approximately 30 minutes, but the unease about everything unfolding in my personal life persisted. So, I chose to drive further north along those familiar, winding, and dimly lit highways. I maintained a steady speed of 65 miles per hour, navigating the curves more slowly in case a deer suddenly appeared around a bend. As I continued to drive, I found myself admiring the vast, empty darkness of the snow-draped fields and barren trees. It was, to be honest, a bit eerie to be all alone with no other cars in sight, seemingly in the middle of nowhere. The few houses set miles back from the road appeared lifeless, and the dead cornfields were gradually being engulfed by snow. It was like a scene from a horror movie, and I half expected a ghost to materialize in my rearview mirror or for someone to emerge from the patches of trees scattered along the horizon. The only illumination came from my headlights, and even then, I had to strain to see through the thick, inky darkness of the night. By now, it was just after 11 o'clock, and I told myself that once I reached the familiar roundabout, which could either lead to a small town or back toward the city, I would return to the city and go home. That roundabout was still perhaps 15 to 25 minutes away, and I continued driving through the quiet, shadowy night. Just minutes away, my imagination conjured the worst scenarios, yet I wasn't overly concerned. After all, I was alone and didn't have any other drivers to fret about, right? Wrong. As I rounded another bend, I spotted a car with its hazard lights blinking, perhaps a quarter of a mile ahead. It appeared to be a dark-colored sedan, positioned such that only part of it was safely on the shoulder, while the rest jutted out onto the road, as if the driver had been forced to stop abruptly but didn't quite succeed. The driver's side door was wide open, and as I decelerated and maneuvered my vehicle toward the opposite side of the road to pass, I noticed what seemed to be blood on the interior of the open door. There was no sign of anyone on the road or in the car, and I was the sole driver in sight. In this rural area, cell phone reception was notoriously unreliable, often non-existent despite desperate attempts to connect. This was precisely the case when I glanced at my phone to check for service. Here I was, a lone woman on a deserted road at night, approaching an abandoned vehicle that appeared to have evidence of an attack inside, with no cell service. I'm not naive. I've watched countless episodes of Investigation Discovery and Criminal Minds and devoured numerous true crime books. I knew the situation screamed danger and peril. Yet, a small part of me couldn't shake the worry that something terrible might have happened to whoever had been in that car. As I drove, I noticed a vehicle on the roadside and felt compelled to assist. These roads rarely see much traffic at night, and with the temperatures plunging below freezing, anyone needing help would be in serious trouble. There was nobody else around to offer aid. Despite my caution, I decided to continue driving, albeit at a slightly reduced speed. As I neared the vehicle, I partially lowered my passenger window, turned off the music, and called out, "Hey, is anyone there? Are you all right?" There was no reply, which made me anxious that someone might be unconscious inside. Still, I hesitated to leave my car to investigate. I resolved to call out once more, and if there was no response, I would drive away and report it as soon as I had cell reception. Should I hear someone, I would then determine my next steps. So I called out again, "Hey, what happened? Are you okay?" Silence lingered before I heard a rustling sound from the shadows among the trees, followed by a gruff voice. Initially relieved, I was about to respond, perhaps even stop my car and get out, when I realized three things almost at once. As I cautiously passed the front of the sedan, I observed that there was no damage to the hood or any other part of the vehicle, which struck me as odd given the blood smeared inside the door. In my rearview mirror, I caught sight of someone emerging from behind the sedan, advancing swiftly toward my car. The person showed no signs of injury or blood on them. They were wearing a mask, not the kind you use for COVID-19 or a typical ski mask, but one reminiscent of those eerie ones you see in the Purge films. Clutched in their hand was something I couldn't quite identify. Though I couldn't discern what it was exactly, its length and shape suggested it could be a tire iron, a crowbar, or something similar. The moment I noticed these alarming details, I didn't hesitate to slam on the gas pedal, driving as though I were escaping from the depths of hell. My heart was pounding fiercely in my chest, and my whole body was trembling. In my rush, I hadn't rolled up my window, and the music was still off, so I could distinctly hear someone, undoubtedly a man, yelling at me. I couldn't make out what he was saying, but I knew I had to leave immediately. As I sped away, I stole a final glance in my rearview mirror, primarily to check if they were getting into their sedan to chase me or if they had given up. The man wielding the weapon remained stationary in the middle of the road, watching me intently. Just before I looked away from the mirror, I noticed a second man emerge from the trees where there had been some commotion earlier. He too wore one of those terrifying masks, and there was no sign of blood on him. I likely violated every speed limit that night, but my only thought was to put as much distance between myself and those men as possible. Once I reached the roundabout, I headed towards town and parked in the Walmart parking lot, which thankfully still had cars from what I assumed were employees closing up for the night. There, I proceeded to have a complete breakdown. Once I managed to compose myself, I reached out to my friend Troy, who works as a police officer, to inform him of the incident. He was understandably worried about me. After making sure I was safe, asking about my location, and whether I was being followed, he explained that since the incident occurred outside the city limits, his ability to help directly was limited. However, he offered to contact the local police or sheriff's office in their jurisdiction to relay my account and initiate an investigation. I accepted his assistance, expressed my gratitude, and then, as I awaited the arrival of law enforcement, I called my boyfriend. Through my tearful sobs, I managed to convey the events that had transpired mere minutes earlier. Naturally, he was deeply concerned for my well-being and insisted that I either return home right away or allow him to come and escort me back himself. I informed him that the police were on their way to take my statement, so leaving was not an option at that moment, but I reassured him of my safety. We remained on the line until I saw the recognizable police cruisers arriving in the parking lot. I provided the officers with my account of the events, and they assured me they would revisit the scene to investigate further and attempt to apprehend the perpetrators. Nevertheless, without any surveillance footage or a detailed description of the individuals, I was doubtful of their chances. In my state of panic, I had failed to note the license plate number, a detail I realized only when the police inquired. All the information they had to proceed with was the vague description of a dark-colored sedan and two masked men. After giving my statement, I returned home, where I stayed closely nestled with my boyfriend throughout the night, alert to every sound the house made. I was filled with fear, worried that those men might show up at any moment to complete whatever they had begun. Since the incident, I haven't received any updates from the police regarding whether they have uncovered any leads, and I doubt they ever will. I'm simply grateful to still be here and that I didn't stop my car or step out. I shudder to think what might have happened to me if I had. I am left with countless questions that remain unanswered. What were they doing? Was that really blood inside the car? Or was it just a ploy to draw more attention? If it was genuine, did they harm someone else? What fate might have awaited me if I had stopped the car? Needless to say, I won't be taking any more late-night drives, and I fervently hope I never encounter those unnerving individuals again. It all began on an ordinary day at work. At the time, I was employed at a modest grocery store, where my responsibilities included collecting shopping carts from the parking lot and bagging groceries, the typical minimum wage tasks. It was a rainy morning, and naturally, I was assigned to cart duty. About 2 hours into my shift, I noticed a man hurriedly trying to load his groceries into his car. I rushed over to assist him with his bags. "Would you like some help getting out of the rain?" I asked. "Yes, thank you so much," he replied. As he closed his trunk, he gave me a look of surprise, scanning me from head to toe with raised eyebrows, before smirking and asking, "Are you a new hire?" "No, I've been here for a couple of months," I replied. "Oh, you are very pretty," he remarked in an oddly suggestive tone. "Thank you. Have a good day," I responded curtly, eager to end the conversation. As I retraced my steps back to the store, aiming to remain concealed until he departed, I sensed his gaze fixed on me as I distanced myself. Nonetheless, I resumed my duties, not dwelling on it much after my break. Later, while stationed at the register bagging groceries, I spotted the same man from earlier enter the store. I acted as if I hadn't noticed him and continued my task. He approached the register, purchasing merely a single chocolate bar. I didn't provide him with a bag. Looming over me, he asked if I intended to bag his item. Apologizing, I replied that I hadn't realized he wanted a bag for just one item. I placed his chocolate bar in a bag and wished him a pleasant day. "Where do you work, sweetheart?" he inquired. Uncomfortable, I replied that I wasn't comfortable sharing that information. He responded, "That's okay. You've been here, 5 hours? You probably finish around 7, right?" As he smiled at me and walked away, I felt a surge of revulsion. I immediately went to my manager and relayed the incident. She advised me not to handle the outdoor duties anymore and suggested I ask someone to accompany me to my car. By the end of my shift, a male coworker walked me to my truck, and together we scanned the parking lot for the man's vehicle. Finding no sign of it, my coworker returned inside, and I started my truck. I called my mom to recount the day's unsettling events, and just as she answered, I exited the parking lot. The moment I turned onto the road, I noticed his car joining the road behind me. I informed my mom that I suspected he might follow me, and she urged me to continue driving to try and lose him. For about 20 minutes, I drove aimlessly, attempting to shake him off my trail. Driving circles around my town, I stopped at a red light when a man pulled up beside me, shouting something out of his open window. I feigned ignorance, pretending he wasn't there, but his words still reached me. "You'd bear some good kids for me," he yelled, followed by, "You'd make a great slave for me, little lady." He then became increasingly explicit about what he intended to do if he managed to catch me. I informed my mom that I was going to dial 911 and instructed her to alert the police if I wasn't home within an hour. While attempting to call the authorities, the man accelerated past my truck, slamming on his brakes in front of me, causing me to panic. I waited for the nearest intersection and quickly turned up the block. During the turn, my phone slipped under my seat, so I decided to head to the closest open establishment, seeking refuge and assistance in calling for help. The nearest open business was a convenience store at a gas station. I pulled in, parked, and sprinted into the store as if my life depended on it. Breathlessly, I explained the situation to the clerk, who led me to the break room and locked me inside. As I processed the possibility that I might survive this terrifying ordeal, I suddenly heard the store's front doors begin to rattle violently. Moments later, the clerk joined me in the break room, locking us both inside. She was on the phone with the police, who were already on their way. We sat in silence, huddled in the darkness. I felt a wave of guilt for involving another woman in what could be our worst nightmare. My mind raced with thoughts. Did I somehow lead him on? All I said was, "Have a good day." I had a feeling that someone had been tailing me for more than just tonight. How did he know which car I drove? Would the police arrive in time? Were we in danger of losing our lives? At last, the small room was bathed in the glow of red and blue lights seeping in through the crack beneath the door. A voice over the intercom assured us it was safe to leave. Trembling, the clerk retrieved her keys and unlocked the door. We stepped out and provided our statements. After the police departed, I turned to my unexpected savior and expressed my deepest gratitude. We hugged, tears in our eyes, and she accompanied me to my car. The following evening, I returned with some food and an Amazon gift card as a token of appreciation. I've survived a near-fatal car crash and stood just 10 feet away from a wild mountain lion, but I can honestly say that this felt like the end of my line. Thank you for reading. Stay vigilant, be cautious, and remain safe. This incident occurred a little over a decade ago. I must have been around 26, though I can't recall the exact year. It was approximately 2012. At that time, I often went out with my friends to bars and parties, staying out quite late most weekends. The friend's house where I typically gathered was located on a side street just off a main road bustling with popular and crowded bars and restaurants. Parking on the street near this house was necessary, and during busy weekends it was common to park several blocks away. The streets closer to the bars were quite nice, but if you ventured a few blocks in the opposite direction, the atmosphere became a bit more ominous as night fell. After an evening spent socializing, I found myself needing to walk back to my car quite late. It was parked several blocks away, in a somewhat more dubious part of town. This all happened during the winter, so I was clad in a thick sweater or pullover and a beanie. This detail matters because, in the dim light, it was difficult for anyone to discern my appearance beyond my general height and build. As I moved further from the bustling bars, the streets grew increasingly deserted, and the roads became quite dark, lacking any streetlights. While I was strolling along the sidewalk, a car began to slowly trail me, matching my pace. It eventually pulled up next to me and came to a stop. The window rolled down, revealing a young woman behind the wheel. She was attractive and remarked that I appeared cold, suggesting I should accept her offer of a ride to my destination. Her demeanor was very congenial. I mentioned that my car wasn't far and thanked her for the offer, but I intended to continue walking. Undeterred, she made a concerted effort to persuade me to join her in the car, emphasizing the cold weather. She didn't engage in any small talk to ascertain that I wasn't a strange person. She simply urged me to get in, quite assertively. Given my attire and the darkness, it was improbable she could have had any clear idea of my appearance to find me appealing. Even if she did, I don't know many women who would willingly offer a ride to a male stranger after midnight. Late one evening, when they found themselves alone in their vehicle, there were at least 10 bars nearby where she could have gone if her intention was merely to meet someone. I couldn't fathom any reason that would compel her to resort to driving around, offering rides to strangers. She persisted in driving alongside me, extending the offer of a ride once more, which I politely declined before continuing on my way. As I quickened my steps, she eventually drove off. Once she was a few blocks ahead, I hurried to my car, ensuring no one was lurking nearby. The entire situation felt peculiar and inexplicable to me. Later, I discussed it with my friends, and all the women concurred that they wouldn't offer a ride to an unknown man, especially at night in such circumstances. Even if the man resembled Ryan Gosling or Channing Tatum, they wouldn't take the risk. My suspicion was that someone was concealed in the back seat, possibly armed, waiting to rob anyone who accepted the ride. I couldn't discern any logical reason for her to offer rides to complete strangers in the dead of night, as it would be perilous for her to pick up random individuals. I simply assumed there was something sinister at play in that car, and I often wonder what might have transpired if someone had accepted her offer and gotten into the car. When I was 18, I was house-sitting with a girl I was studying with. The family for whom we were house-sitting attended the same church as she did, although I didn't know them well myself. My role was primarily to keep her company in a large house. This took place in 1997, a time when an average person like me didn't own a cell phone. During that week, there was a brief hiatus in the school calendar, which explained why the family I was house-sitting for was away and why the streets in the vicinity were quieter than usual. My apartment, as well as the house I was looking after, was located not far from the university. In fact, my apartment was just a 3-minute walk from it, and the house was an additional 5 minutes by car. As it was a student neighborhood, The area was particularly tranquil that week. The first strange occurrence during my stay at the house was a vivid dream in which I found myself driving through a shadowy forest along a hilly, dirt road. The only illumination came from my car's headlights. As I began descending a hill, the headlights abruptly went out, plunging everything into darkness. The car gradually slowed to a halt and died. When I awoke the next morning, I discovered that my car wouldn't start. It had been functioning perfectly the previous day, so I had to call a mechanic to come and fix it. Turned out to be the starter motor. That was the first unsettling event of the week. Approximately a day later, on Friday, I was planning to drive back to my parents' home, which was situated in a smaller town about 45 minutes away. I packed up my belongings at the large house and intended to stop by my apartment to gather anything else I needed for the weekend. As mentioned earlier, the journey between the house and my apartment was only about a 5-minute drive. Given that it was winter, darkness had already fallen by the time I left at around 7 p.m. While driving away from the house, I noticed something in the rearview mirror. I noticed the headlights of a car trailing me closely. Every time I made a turn, it mirrored my movements. I was cautious, but not overly alarmed, just aware enough to recognize that something peculiar was happening. As I approached a traffic light, the car vanished from my sight, giving me a brief sense of relief. However, that feeling was quickly shattered when I realized the car had pulled up beside me. I glanced to my right and saw a man alone in the vehicle, smiling at me with a deranged expression. For a fleeting moment, I thought, wow, I should really drive while wearing a beanie or something, so people don't realize I'm a petite 5 feet 2 inches woman with long blonde hair cascading down my back. I also noted that he was in the lane meant for turning right, which brought some comfort. As I drove off, the same headlights appeared behind me once more. What a jerk, I thought. Who drives like that? Thankfully, my left turn was coming up soon. After enduring another minute or two of this unnerving pursuit, I slowed down deliberately, refrained from signaling, and made a sudden sharp left turn into my driveway. I opened the automatic gate and quickly drove inside as it closed securely behind me. I exhaled a sigh of relief, thinking the ordeal had ended. Gathering a few items from the car to take up with me, I noticed something unsettling on my way to the stairwell. There was a man at the gate that had just closed behind me. He remained on the other side while I was at the far end of the parking lot. I recognized him as the man from the tailgating car. He was jumping up and down, violently shaking the gate in a fit of rage. Fortunately, I was safely on this side, so I wasn't completely paralyzed by fear, and besides, there was a group of students making a commotion nearby, likely arriving for a party or some event. I headed to the staircase and began ascending from the ground floor to the first level. As I rounded the stairs on the first floor, I noticed someone sprinting across the parking lot towards the staircase. In retrospect, I still can't comprehend why I didn't understand what was happening. I suppose it's because, subconsciously, I knew that there was a group being ushered in through the pedestrian gate as I was turning the corner on the staircase between the second and third floors. Suddenly, someone touched me. I spun around to see a guy who had slipped in as part of the small crowd. He said something, and I retorted with a sarcastic comment, telling him to leave me alone. Then, I turned my back on him to continue up the stairs. As I reached the third floor, he grabbed me from behind, pressing my back against his chest with his left arm around my neck. I felt something pressed against my right side. A knife. He led me downward. I remember thinking that the light was broken on the lower level, and this situation couldn't end well, but I remained calm. I resisted slightly, and he tightened his hold. I felt like I wasn't getting enough air and began to go limp. He started to drop me, and I was growing faint. I elbowed him, making contact. He released me but quickly turned to face me, tearing the front of my button-down shirt. Then he stopped and looked at someone standing behind me, someone taller than him. His eyes widened, and he turned to flee. I screamed, and then I turned around too, looked to see who had come to help. There was no one present, but residents began emerging from their apartments afterward. The police were called, marking their second visit that night. It turned out that the peculiar thing was that my father had already contacted the authorities, and they had passed by an hour earlier. My mother had experienced an unsettling premonition all evening and had persistently nagged my dad, convinced that something terrible was about to befall me. As it happened, she was correct. They apprehended him, and I was able to identify him in a lineup. He was a serial offender in the area, accused of assaulting approximately 14 women. One woman had even thrown herself from the first floor of her apartment to escape him, resulting in a broken leg. Weeks later, the police reached out to me before his trial. Somehow, his cell door had been left open, and he had escaped, presumably with inside assistance. I've encountered a few unsettling experiences in my life, but this one still makes me reflect on how quickly things could have taken a turn for the worse. At the time, I was a 20-year-old woman, and this story takes place when I lived in southern Indiana, in an extremely isolated area. It was a weekend evening, and my best friend and I were returning home after her graveyard shift at a local waffle restaurant. She decided to pick up her dog from her home, so we could spend the night at my place, a detail that would prove significant later. We began our journey into the rural countryside where I lived, and to reach my house we had to travel down a long, narrow dirt road. About a mile in, we noticed the headlights of a truck as we drew nearer, we realized it was a sleek truck, likely from around 2018. I must admit, I'm not very knowledgeable about vehicles, so bear with me. The truck was parked sideways, obstructing the entire path. Puzzled, I exited the car and asked the driver if he was all right. Initially, he appeared hopeful upon seeing me and explained, "I'm just waiting for a friend to come fetch me. My truck's stuck." He greeted me with a smile, but I couldn't help but notice his pupils were almost fully dilated. He glanced back at my car, saw I had company, and observed the dog poking its head out the window. His smile quickly vanished as he remarked, "Pit bulls are mean and nasty." With that, he turned away and climbed back into his truck. I returned to my friend and advised, "Put this in reverse and use whatever driving skills you have to get us out of here." We reversed my poor '95 Cadillac, which really wasn't suited for a dirt road, and managed to make our way back to the main road, feeling relieved. We chose an alternate route home, but to our astonishment, the same man was parked on that road, standing off to the side, smiling and staring into our headlights. On the brink of panic, we floored the gas pedal the rest of the way home. I have no idea how he managed to reach there before us or what his intentions were, but I'm grateful I wasn't alone, being a rather naive college girl at the time. Even though the presence of the pit bull likely saved us from that man, the dog later unexpectedly snapped at my friend a few months afterward, causing her serious injuries. It had been a good day up until that moment. Throughout the dog's entire life, I knew her owner had been responsible, so I suppose it's just an innate tendency with pit bulls. They can become unpredictable at any moment. My name is Christine, and I was 23 years old when this unforgettable New Year's Eve incident unfolded. I was out with my cherished dog, Max, just a few hours before midnight. I decided to take him for a brief walk before getting ready for the party. Max was generally well-behaved and accustomed to roaming freely without a leash, so I chose to let him off for a moment to savor the crisp air as we strolled through our neighborhood. The evening was brimming with anticipation. People throughout the town were getting ready for the forthcoming New Year's celebrations. The streets were adorned with vibrant decorations, and you could sense the thrill in the atmosphere. As Max and I walked along the sidewalk, he eagerly sniffed around, delighting in the scents of the night. The night was still young, and there was no sign of chaos yet. Little did I know that everything would transform within the next minute. It was then that the first firework burst in the sky, illuminating the darkness with dazzling colors and a thunderous boom. I instinctively clutched Max, pulling him close, but it was too late. The abrupt noise startled him, and in a flash, he wriggled free from my grasp and dashed down the street. I called out his name desperately, but he didn't respond. The barrage of fireworks drowned out my cries, and I watched him panic as he vanished into the night. My heart pounded as I realized I had to find him amidst the chaos of the celebration. As I spent countless hours driving through the neighborhood in search of my dog, the fireworks continuously illuminated the sky, and the noise was overwhelming. It was challenging to concentrate amidst the bright lights and thunderous explosions, but finding him was my priority. If I was distracted by the fireworks, I could only imagine the terror he was experiencing. At every corner I turned and on each street I passed, I called out his name, desperate to bring him home and shield him from the chaos. The celebration surrounded me, yet all I cared about was locating my furry companion. I informed my friends and family that I wouldn't be joining them, as my sole focus was on finding my dog. A few of them offered to assist in the search, but even if they located him, I wasn't certain he would willingly go with them. Finally, as I turned onto a dimly lit street, I noticed a crowd gathered around a public bus, indicating some kind of disturbance. My heart surged with hope. I parked the car and hurried towards the group. Observing their chatter and body language, I realized they were reacting to an animal on the bus. I made my way to the entrance and climbed aboard. There he was, cowering in a corner, barking frantically at each firework whistling through the night sky. I spoke to him softly, and he recognized my voice. Though the fireworks continued, they no longer mattered to me. I reached down, scooped him up, and cradled him in my arms. He snuggled against my chest, seeking solace from the terrifying night. Grateful for their efforts, I thanked everyone for trying to help him and quickly made my way back to the car. I sat in my car, securely holding Max, as we embarked on the drive home. The journey was notably quieter, with the sounds of fireworks gradually fading away. Max had been found, and the new year could finally commence with both of us safe and sound. As we sat together, watching the fireworks through the window, the dazzling lights that had once frightened him now seemed to sparkle in celebration of our reunion. It was a New Year's Eve we would never forget, one that had sent me on a wild, late-night adventure to find my dearest friend. Earlier that year, I had borrowed my dad's Tesla to visit my aunt who lived in the countryside. As a 24-year-old who loves driving, especially my dad's car, I was thrilled he allowed me to take it. The road trip led me through some fairly remote areas, yet it was a smooth drive. On my way there, I passed a small town that had a charging station for the Tesla. While recharging, I attracted quite a bit of attention, since not many electric cars frequented the area, and the locals were full of questions. I completed the rest of the journey without any issues and stayed with my aunt for a few days. Eventually, I decided to return home on a sunny afternoon, beginning my trip around 3 p.m. The initial part of the drive took me through a bustling town. Afterward, I navigated through some quiet suburban neighborhoods. As I retraced my steps on the same route, I soon found myself on the long, narrow highway that seemed to stretch and wind endlessly. It was tranquil, but as hours slipped by, I began to feel increasingly fatigued. To stay awake, I cranked up the volume on the radio, hoping the noise would jolt me into alertness. Squinting at the road to maintain my concentration, I noticed a faint glimmer in the distance. It was the reflection of my car's headlights on another vehicle parked on the roadside. As I drew nearer, it became clear that the car was deserted. The night was dark, and the windows were tinted, adding an eerie feeling to this isolated spot. The thought of being stranded there was unnerving, especially since the nearest town was an hour's drive away. I pressed on with my journey, my senses heightened in case someone was lurking nearby. A few minutes later, a glaringly bright light caught my attention in the rearview mirror. The blinding intensity made it impossible to discern the car behind me. Only their dazzling headlights were visible. They seemed to be gaining on me, so I eased off the accelerator, thinking they would soon overtake me. However, as I continued, I saw something disturbing ahead. Another car was positioned squarely in the middle of the road, completely obstructing my route. Its lights were off, and I didn't see it until I was almost upon it. I slammed on the brakes as the situation dawned on me. The lights in the rearview mirror grew even brighter, accompanied by the sound of a vehicle rapidly approaching from behind. Weighing my options, I decided to turn my car around to escape the predicament. But as I glanced back, I saw another car parked diagonally behind me, effectively blocking any chance of retreat. In that moment, everything clicked in my mind, and I heard the car doors around me begin to open. Panic surged through my veins as I instinctively veered off the road, steering into the forest in an attempt to circumvent the obstacles and reach the other side, beyond the parked vehicles. My focus was so consumed with dodging the trees and ensuring my car didn't get ensnared that I failed to check if anyone was pursuing me. Roughly 10 seconds after leaving the road, a gunshot reverberated through the air. Glancing back, I saw they were indeed in pursuit, with the bullet striking somewhere in front of my car. Fear and adrenaline coursed through my body as I kept navigating the winding dirt path. Another shot resounded, hitting the rear of my vehicle. I drove like a madman, hurtling at full speed through the dense trees, desperately attempting to lose them. My Tesla impressively tackled the nearly off-road escapade I pushed it through. Eventually, I realized I had managed to shake them off, but I didn't decelerate until I reached the highway once more. It took about 10 minutes of driving before I regained sufficient cell phone reception to contact the police. The assailants never caught up with me, and as far as I know, they were never captured. To this day, I can't help but ponder how they orchestrated such an elaborate setup. Had they noticed me in an expensive car and hastily concocted a plan? Was it the men I had spoken to while charging my car? I had mentioned I would be passing through again in a few days. The uncertainty gnaws at me, but as you might expect, I'm no longer permitted to drive my dad's Tesla. My name is Danny. When I was 19, this event unfolded. I was living with my parents and eager to move out, so I purchased a car using the money I had saved. Eventually, I secured a job with Our Breeds. I had seen their ads everywhere, claiming it was easy money with flexible hours. The only requirement was covering the fuel costs. Several friends had told me how great it was, so I decided to go through the sign-up process and give it a try. However, the reality was quite different. Driving around on a tight schedule made the job quite stressful, and the earnings were often just a few dollars. If you didn't snag the orders with high tips or payouts, you'd barely make enough to cover the fuel expenses. Being a teenager, my only financial responsibilities were my car payments and insurance, so I didn't need to earn a fortune. Still, it felt like I was being shortchanged, considering the time and effort involved. I kept the idea of finding a different job on the back burner because I was somewhat lazy, but everything changed after a particular incident. I accepted an order from KFC and set off to deliver it to the customer's location. It was quite a sizable order, enough to feed maybe 4 or 5 people, but the payment for this delivery was significantly higher than usual, and the tip was $20, which was unheard of. The app informs you of your earnings when you accept an order. While en route to the destination, I received a message through the UBS app. The customer inquired about my whereabouts. The app indicated the delivery time was approximately 30 minutes, and I was on track to arrive in about 15. I could literally see my real-time location on the app, so I couldn't grasp why they were asking for updates. There seemed to be no point in stopping to respond, so I continued driving, knowing I'd arrive in about 5 minutes. Within seconds, I received another impatient message demanding why it was taking so long. I had just picked up the order a few minutes earlier, and they could clearly track this on the app, so it wasn't as though I was running late. I dismissed the odd messages, assuming it was either a mistake on their end, that they might be intoxicated, or perhaps it was just a typical Karen situation. I was somewhat familiar with the area, though I hadn't frequently visited this particular part of town. It was located in what one might call a rough neighborhood, known for gang activity and minimal police presence. Most people avoided coming here, but I had driven through a few times and knew it wasn't excessively dangerous. The destination was an apartment building, and as I approached, I noticed many people watching me. I parked my car and checked my phone, only to find another message filled with harsh language, urging me to hurry up. Typically, I leave my phone on the stand to view the delivery instructions, but I realized it was unwise to leave it out in plain sight, so I took it with me. The instructions directed me to go inside and deliver the order to the customer's apartment, which was somewhat unusual, but I assumed they simply didn't want to come downstairs. I pressed the button for the apartment number and was buzzed in as I entered. As I ascended the staircase, an unsettling sensation clung to me, as if something was not quite right. People were randomly dispersed throughout the building, and I had to carefully step over a woman passed out on the stairs. Every instinct screamed for me to drop the bag and flee. Reaching the apartment door, a voice from within called for me to enter. I paused, puzzled as to why they couldn't simply come and retrieve it themselves, but mindful of the ticking clock and eager to complete the delivery, I proceeded inside. As the door swung shut behind me, I realized my blunder. The place was shrouded in darkness, with the only illumination coming from an enormous TV mounted on the wall. I glanced around and noticed a few individuals with a dubious appearance. I offered the bag, but they regarded me with disdain. The man who appeared to be in charge signaled for someone else to take it from me. He began to circle me as I stood there, utterly paralyzed with fear. I was clueless about what I was doing there or how I had landed in such a perilous predicament. Without hesitation, he started probing me, asking what I had. I explained I only carried the food and that I needed to leave. He chuckled and instructed me to sit. By this point, I was entirely out of my element. He began questioning why I had taken so long and asked what I could do to compensate for it. I suggested that I could refund the tip, which sent him into a frenzy. "Tip? What tip? I didn't give you any tip," he exclaimed. Foolishly, I retrieved my phone to demonstrate that he had indeed left a $20 tip. He snatched it from my grasp and informed me that he was keeping the refund. As everyone else erupted into laughter, I found myself utterly humiliated before these people, feeling utterly helpless. I meekly requested the return of my phone, but being neither particularly large nor strong, I was primarily focused on surviving the situation. When he denied my request, I resigned myself to my fate. He took a seat and began rummaging through the bag, selecting the food he desired. He glanced at me and, with a sudden jolt, brandished a knife, asking what the hell I was still doing there. Apologizing profusely, I swiftly made my way to the door, sprinted down the stairs, and nearly stumbled over an unconscious woman on my way out. Once I reached my car, I drove faster than I ever had before, heading to a safe location where I finally broke down in tears. My entire body trembled, and I was hyperventilating, overwhelmed by the chaos of the ordeal. What on earth was I thinking, venturing into someone else's apartment, especially a place like that? Despite having been explicitly warned never to enter such places, the thought of earning a substantial tip clouded my judgment. When I returned home, I recounted the incident to my parents. They were incredibly supportive and relieved that I was unharmed, but they were also furious that I had disregarded their warnings about entering dangerous areas. We managed to lock the phone remotely, so it likely wouldn't be of much use to him, but I had no illusions about ever recovering it. A few weeks later, when I finally acquired a new phone, I discovered that Uber had suspended my account, claiming the order was never delivered. From their perspective, it appeared as though I had vanished with the delivery, and understandably so. He would take the hint and leave soon. However, he lingered, seemingly oblivious to my subtle cues. Despite the unease creeping in, I maintained a polite demeanor, unwilling to provoke any unnecessary tension. Eventually, I managed to excuse myself, mentioning that I had a long ride ahead and needed to get going. He hesitated, as if contemplating whether to press further, but ultimately he relented, offering a quick farewell and a casual wave. As I rode away, the unsettling encounter lingered in my mind, a stark reminder of the unpredictability of interactions on the road. Reflecting on that evening, I felt a mix of emotions. On one hand, I cherished the freedom my bike afforded me, the thrill of the ride and the camaraderie among fellow bikers. On the other hand, I was acutely aware of the occasional unwanted scrutiny that came with being a female rider. It was a delicate balance, navigating the exhilarating world of motorcycling while keeping my guard up. Despite the challenges, my love for riding never waned. Each journey brought new experiences and lessons, shaping me into the confident rider I am today. Even when faced with discomfort, I remained resolute in my passion, knowing that the road, with all its twists and turns, was where I truly belonged. He eventually grew tired and rode off into the sunset. However, that wasn't his intention. After refueling our tanks, he hopped back on his motorcycle and revved his engine, signaling that he intended to follow me. Anxiety began to creep in as I realized the stranger wanted to ride alongside me. This wasn't entirely unheard of. I had occasionally ridden side by side with other bikers until we went our separate ways. Yet, I was on my way home and didn't want anyone tagging along. As the miles passed, he continued to ride beside me, occasionally attempting to impress me with a wheelie or a burst of speed. It wasn't overly unsettling, just persistent. I decided it was time to lose him. Knowing my bike and its capabilities well, I hit the throttle, accelerating away from him. The wind rushed past me as I pushed my bike to its limits. Glancing back, I saw him in the distance, desperately trying to catch up. Adrenaline coursed through my veins as I weaved through the winding roads, but the persistent rider wasn't giving up. He was closing in quickly. I could hear the roar of his engine growing louder, and I knew I had to make a decision. When he caught up again, I realized that I wasn't going to shake him off. I decided to pull over, and he pulled up next to me. He was beaming, as if we had been playing a fun game. Removing his helmet, he revealed a massive grin on his face. I informed him that I was heading home now and that I'd see him around. He continued to smile at me and assured me he'd make sure I got back safely. I really wasn't in the mood. I snapped and told him firmly that I was fine and didn't require any company. Just as I was about to depart, I gave him a wave. One last attempt to make it unmistakably clear that I was saying goodbye and wanted to be left alone. He placed his helmet down, which delayed him as he prepared to follow. In that moment, I managed to put a considerable distance between us. When I glanced back, I saw him far behind, frantically trying to catch up. Adrenaline surged through my veins as I wove through the twisting roads, but the persistent rider refused to relent. He was closing in rapidly, and the roar of his engine grew louder, warning me that I needed to make a critical decision. As the road took a sharp bend, I had to reduce my speed to navigate it safely. That was when he saw his opportunity to overtake me. He revved his engine and surged forward, but he misjudged the turn. Suddenly, he slammed into the wall with a thunderous crash. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched in disbelief. He flew over the barrier and vanished into the darkness. Without hesitation, I screeched to a stop and rushed to the edge. I pulled out my flashlight and shone it into the water, desperately trying to locate him. It was nearly pitch black, and I could barely discern how far he had gone. All I knew was that I saw him fly straight ahead. He must have landed in the river. However, the river was wide, and visibility was severely limited. I called out for him while fumbling for my phone to summon help. The river was moving swiftly, and he could have easily been swept miles downstream by the time assistance arrived. I remained there for hours that night, filled with anxiety and dread. While searching for the elusive stranger, I was consumed by a desperate hope that we would locate him. An overwhelming sense of guilt gnawed at me. One moment, I was fleeing from him, and the next, all I desired was to see him alive and well. I still grapple with the notion that I might be to blame. I didn't even afford him the opportunity to explain why he was heading in the same direction as me. His body was never found. That river has claimed numerous lives over the years, and I feel as though I contributed to that toll. I had been conversing with a girl online for several weeks, and she seemed like an ideal match for me. So, when she proposed that we meet at her place, which was inconveniently located in the middle of nowhere, I couldn't resist the allure of the adventure. My GPS guided me through a maze of back roads, promising I was nearing her location. Yet, as I rounded yet another bend, I found myself in the heart of a seemingly deserted junkyard. Rusty old cars and dilapidated buildings loomed ominously in the darkness, illuminated only by my car's headlights and the moonlight. Confusion swiftly morphed into fear when I realized I had arrived at the wrong destination. Panic surged through me as the harsh glare of headlights abruptly appeared behind me. A group of burly men, their faces obscured by shadows, blocked my path and encircled my truck. One of them, unmistakably the leader, approached my window, his eyes brimming with suspicion. "What the hell are you doing here, boy? This is private property." My words spilled out in a hurried explanation of my predicament, that I was supposed to meet someone nearby, but my GPS had misled me. Their exchanged glances morphed into a menacing grin, suspicion evident in their eyes. Sure, the leader remarked. "But you see, we've been dealing with some trespassers lately. Can't be too cautious, you know? His companions laughed ominously. Without uttering another word, I slammed my car into reverse and backed out as quickly as I could, my heart racing. I spun the car around faster than I thought possible, fumbling with the GPS in a desperate attempt to direct it home. The men continued to shout at me as I sped away, but my troubles were far from over. My GPS, struggling to keep pace with my frantic escape, soon led me onto an even narrower road. Darkness enveloped me as I ventured deeper into the woods, and my anxiety was causing my legs to tremble uncontrollably, my hands barely able to follow simple commands. With no cell service and no sign of civilization, I was truly lost. Suddenly, as if mocking my desperation, a deer leapt from the shadows onto the road. Panic surged through me as I slammed on the brakes, bringing the car screeching almost to a halt. The deer barely reacted, continuing to leisurely prance down the road. It was then that I noticed the rednecks from the junkyard had caught up, their truck dangerously close behind me. They were leaning on the horn, shouting profanities, and I began to fear that I might not make it out alive. Desperation drove me to follow the deer, inching along at a crawl and praying the animal would move aside. But it stubbornly occupied the road ahead, prolonging my anguish. The passage of time seemed endless. The longer it persisted ahead of me, the more it began to resemble some sort of fiend. It appeared as if it belonged in Norse mythology, its horns resembling human arms reaching skyward. My heart raced as I tracked the creature's every movement. The relentless rednecks were inching ever closer, their voices growing louder and more furious. The tension was unbearable. I found myself trapped behind the deer with no escape, while a group of hostile men approached from behind. The narrow road seemed to stretch infinitely, and with each passing moment, I couldn't help but imagine all the possible ways I might meet my end. The men in the truck behind me began to nudge the back of my car, their engine roaring, eager to force me off the road. Panic set in as I started honking at the deer. I even considered abandoning my vehicle and fleeing into the dark, but I knew that would be futile. They would catch me within moments. As we endured that dreadful drive on the terrible road, the deer suddenly leaped to the side, vanishing into the thick underbrush. I seized the moment and accelerated. Glancing back in my mirror, I saw the deer leap out again, right in front of their truck. They slammed on their brakes and began shouting frantically at it to move out of the way. I'm certain they had no qualms about killing a deer, but ramming it with their truck at such a slow speed would likely only make it angry, and it wouldn't be wise. Without a moment's hesitation, I barreled down the remainder of the road at full speed, heedless of the car's condition as I hit every bump along the way. It felt like I drove for an eternity, my heart pounding relentlessly, until I finally stumbled upon a small town. There, I managed to get my bearings and eventually found my way to the nearest motel. Only after I locked the door behind me did I feel secure enough to breathe. As I lay in bed, attempting to process the events that had unfolded, I couldn't help but ponder about that deer. Was it simply a coincidence, an odd twist of fate, or did it somehow understand my fear, guiding me away from danger and thwarting their pursuit? In the midst of this turmoil, I had nearly forgotten about my date. When I checked the app to explain what had occurred, I discovered she had unmatched me. My feelings about the situation were conflicted. Had she been a catfish all along, luring me into peril? Did she think I had ghosted her, leading her to unmatch out of embarrassment? Part of me suspected she had set me up, either as a prank or in cahoots with the junkyard group. Whatever their scheme was, I couldn't be certain, but I have since abandoned dating apps. On a bitterly cold winter night, I found myself in a predicament that would send shivers down any parent's spine. My 2 young children sat trembling in the back seat as I struggled to remain composed. We were stranded on a snow-covered road in the middle of nowhere, miles away from the nearest town. The car's engine had sputtered its last breath some time ago, leaving us in silence and isolation. My phone had no signal, and desperation clung to the frigid air as I tried to reassure my children that assistance was on its way. I had contacted a tow truck, but it felt like hours had slipped by since then, and the icy darkness was relentless. Just as I was about to surrender hope of being rescued, A pair of headlights emerged in the distance, slowly growing brighter. Relief flooded over me as a man arrived in a pickup truck, his frosty breath visible in the cold night air. "Looks like you folks could use some help," he called out. His voice was friendly, yet something about the situation put me on edge. I was apprehensive, but the thought of my children enduring the bitter cold pushed me to accept his assistance. "Yes, thank you," I replied, attempting to mask my unease. "We've already called a tow truck, but it's taking a while." The man didn't waste a moment. He opened the hood of my car and began working on the engine. His hands moved skillfully, almost too swiftly, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. As the minutes stretched on, feeling like an eternity, the man turned his attention to my children. "You know, it's pretty darn cold out here," he remarked, casting a warm smile in their direction. "Why don't you let them sit in my truck? It's nice and warm in there." I hesitated, glancing at my children, who were nearly blue from the cold, their teeth chattering uncontrollably. "No, thank you, we're okay," I stammered, trying to summon some courage. But the man was insistent, assuring me it was the best thing for them. "And just until I get this sorted out," he assured me, his smile unwavering. "I've got hot chocolate in the truck. They'll really enjoy it." The children began to whimper, their small voices laden with unhappiness. A lump formed in my throat. "All right, but just for a short while," I conceded, my heart pounding as my son and daughter clambered into the stranger's truck. I watched nervously from a distance as minutes stretched into what seemed like hours while the man continued to work on my car. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was dreadfully amiss, and my mind swirled with ominous scenarios. The kids, wrapped in the stranger's blankets, appeared oblivious to the unsettling atmosphere that surrounded us. They giggled and chatted about how cozy and warm the truck was. My daughter even remarked how lovely it would be to spend the night in a comfortable bed instead of the chilly car. The stranger, who had been tinkering with my car's engine, suddenly looked up and said, "You know, the nearest town is only about a half-hour drive from here. I'd be more than willing to take your kids there, give them a hot meal, and a place to sleep for the night. It's not safe for them to stay out here." My heart raced as my children's faces lit up with excitement, and they began begging me to let them go, their voices brimming with innocence and trust. "Mom, please, it'll be fun," my son exclaimed. Despite the biting cold that still enveloped me, a different kind of chill ran down my spine. I absolutely despised everything about this situation. I needed to protect them. I felt an overwhelming need to shield my children, yet allowing them to depart with a stranger was clearly out of the question. At the same time, remaining in the freezing cold was not a viable option either. My frustration grew as my children seemed oblivious to our precarious situation, ignoring my attempts to convey the seriousness of it through stern looks. The stranger's persistence, combined with my children's rising enthusiasm, placed me in a torturous predicament. Summoning as much courtesy as I could, I replied, "Thank you so much for your offer, but the tow truck should be here shortly, and we'll be back on the road soon. We wouldn't want to inconvenience you any further." The man's expression shifted, his eyes narrowing slightly as he glanced at me with a flicker of irritation. "Ma'am, I'm just trying to help. It's not safe for your kids out here in the cold." "I promise I'm a good guy," he insisted. The standoff continued, my heart thundering in my chest as the tension mounted. The stranger's persistence clashed with my instinct to protect my children from any potential danger hidden behind his seemingly generous offer. As moments slipped by, the kids shivered despite the warmth emanating from the stranger's truck, and I could no longer dismiss their discomfort. Trying to maintain a calm demeanor, I told them, "It's time to get back into our car. The tow truck should be here any moment." With reluctance, the children agreed, and we climbed out of the stranger's truck, expressing our gratitude for his assistance. As we made our way back to our car, the man's eyes followed us intently. Disappointed but not insistent, he trailed after us without pressing further. I hurriedly gathered the children and ushered them back into the car, ensuring the doors were securely locked. As we settled inside, the distant hum of a tow truck's engine reached us, promising relief. The vehicle arrived, its lights piercing the darkness like a beacon of hope.